Hey, hello everyone. All set? Thank you, Craig. Hello everyone. Thanks for joining the 2025 CGP webinar today. We are recording this and we do plan to post this webinar on our webpage after the fact. In addition to that, we also plan to put up the slide deck to make that available as well. So many of the slides will have links on them or information that you'll be able to go back to at your own pace, at your own leisure after the fact. Let's see. So just a quick rundown for this webinar, the agenda. We'll start out with a presentation. I'll run through the 2025 CGP presentation prepared for this. It should be approximately 90 minutes, give or take, depending on how in depth we go. And then following that, there will be a 10-minute break. And after the break, we will open it up for a question and answer session. I'm happy to take questions and answer any questions that there may be based on the material that we present. So that's kind of open-ended. We have plenty of time allocated for that if needed. So we are stacking the presentation at the front. So if you want to leave after that, that's fine. But we will be around after the break to answer any questions that come in after that. All right. All right, so this first portion will actually do the presentation. This is the 2025 CGP. My name is John Muthersbaugh. It's pronounced moo like a cow, ba like a sheep, Muthersbaugh. For those of you, everyone registering, we had a question of whether or not you're familiar with the previous version of the CGP, and the majority of attendees answered that yes, you are familiar with that. Several aren't, which is fine, but for those of you who knew the previous version or previous versions, Dave Gasper, who worked at the DEC, retired last year, and he was kind of the coordinator of the CGP program. And now that he's retired, I am attempting to fill his shoes. So we'll go through looking at this new 2025 construction general permit. So for this presentation, we have three sections for the presentation. Especially for those of you who are not familiar with the previous version, the first section is just a big picture. What is this? Just kind of the background, the context for it, and kind of like a CGP 101, just the basics of what the permit is and what it's all about. The second section of the presentation will look at the CGP web pages on our DEC website specific to the program and give a rundown of what's available and accessible on those pages. And then the third section is really the main portion of this presentation. We'll do a walkthrough of this 2025 CGP, and that will be the bulk of the presentation, going through the different items listed there. All right, so jumping into the first section, actually, sorry, before we do that, just big picture, as we go for all the information that we share today, just kind of the old adage or the concept of give a person a fish or teach them to fish. The idea here is we're providing a lot of information. It's quite a bit. And like I said earlier, especially if you're just logging in, we're recording this. We'll post this. We'll also share the presentation on our webpage so that you can go back through afterwards and go to the web pages, the links provided, and the concept being we really want to provide the fishing rod, the fishing net, the tools to go find the information that you need in the future, not just the fish for one time today. So the first section, big picture, what is the CGP? We'll dive into this one. For this section, like I said, we'll provide some context. We'll look at briefly DEC, who we are. We'll look at SPDES or SPDES and some regulations behind that, and stormwater, and then get into the CGP 101, kind of the basics of the program. So first off, looking at the permit document, if you look at the front cover, the title of the permit is on the front. It's the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or NYSDEC, SPDES, SPDES, General Permit for Stormwater Discharges from Construction Activity. And that is a very long title, quite a mouthful, and In simple terms, we just refer to this permit as the Construction General Permit, or the CGP. And this 2025 version has a specific permit number, which is GP-0-25. So GP25. This is the currently effective version of the permit. The previous version was GP-0-20, which expired, and this one is now issued and effective and has replaced it at the end of January this year, 2025. So to go into context, we'll look at what the DEC is. Within the DEC, we'll look at what SPEEDIES stands for in the SPEEDIES program. And then specifically within the SPEEDIES program, we'll talk a little bit about stormwater, and then we'll go into the kind of CGP 101. So here's a link for just the about page for DEC. The name of our organization kind of is self-explanatory. It's the purpose is environmental conservation or protection. It was initially created in 1970, and it's a very large organization with many divisions and offices, 24, and then further broken down into different bureaus. And all of these divisions and offices are to fulfill our mission and the functions and regulations that have been established by 6 NYCR, shown there, Title 6 of New York Codes, Rules, and Regulations, 6 NYCRR or 6 NYCR. And so I work in New York State DEC's Division of Water, and like I said, it's a very big organization. There are many other divisions, but I'm specifically within the Division of Water and the Bureau of Water Permits. So within DEC, we have the SPEEDIES program, or State Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It's a permit program. And this SPEEDIES program is really just to protect surface and groundwater resources. And it's kind of got the authority behind it of the Environmental Conservation Law, or ECL, and specifically Article 17, Water Pollution Control of the ECL. And the SPEEDIES program, in the second paragraph there, it talks about it being approved by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or US EPA. And that's based on the Clean Water Act. So the EPA has the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, or NPDES, NPDES, and that national program has been authorized to certain state governments. So New York State has implemented the state version of it, SPEEDIES. So that's where it all comes from. And within the SPEEDIES program, there is both a wastewater side and a stormwater side. And within the stormwater side, where we're focused today, and within stormwater, there are 3 general permits within the New York State DEC SPEEDIES program: the Multi-Sector General Permit, or MSGP, the Municipal Separate Storm Sewer Systems, or MS4 General Permit, and the Construction General Permit, or CGP. And each of these general permits are kind of a standardized general permit that anyone who meets these standard conditions, it's easier for them to obtain coverage under the permit, go on with the work, and kind of meet the requirements of that permit. It's more efficient kind of administratively to do so, opposed to having an individual SPEEDIES permit that is specifically tailored to one facility. And all these stormwater permits, they're all to protect surface water from pollutants carried in stormwater, being rain or snow melt that doesn't infiltrate, so it's not soaking to the ground. And as it comes down, could pick up different pollutants on its way and carry those pollutants in the runoff to surface water, negatively impacting water quality. And so if you think of just one single family home, it has an impervious roof, it has a driveway with vehicles, maybe a little bit of sidewalk, which isn't so much necessarily of an issue on its own, but when you think of the entire neighborhood and the road and the nearby commercial area or industrial area and all of the built environment, there can be a lot of changes to the hydrology in an area and a lot of pollutants that can get picked up in these different areas. And that's why there are the different, like the MSGP, the MS4GP, and the CGP, but all to protect our surface waters from pollution carried in stormwater. So that's all just kind of the context for the CGP, kind of how it fits into the broader DEC program within SPEEDs. And now just looking at the CGP basics, if you're not familiar with the previous version, just this kind of like CGP 101, like so when is the CGP applicable? What is it concerned with? And the answer to that is soil disturbance. So on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see an example of someone with a bulldozer and a lot of soil exposed, and they're moving the earth around. The CGP is concerned with this kind of activity. If someone's going to do any kind of tree clearing or grading, any work like that, that's when the CGP would come into play and be applicable. And what is the purpose of the CGP? Why is it even here? What's it protecting? And the answer to that is water quality. So if you are exposing all that soil and then stormwater comes, we don't want to see the stormwater pick up all of that soil, silt, sediment, or other construction pollutants and carry that off to nearby surface water and destroy the environment, the ecology in the surface water, or cause erosion. So this is kind of the basics of the CGP. And we will get into more detail in the third section of this presentation of actual requirements in the permit. But just big picture on like the CGP basics, what is the CGP all about? It really comes down to this SWIP, or Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, SWPPP, we just say SWIP. At the heart of the CGP, it requires that this plan be developed and then implemented. It's a plan for both temporary controls and then in many cases permanent controls. On the left-hand side, temporary controls would be erosion and sediment controls, like excuse me, like the control pictured in the image there, which is a very common practice to use silt fence, which is physically holding back the water that on that disturbed soil, the stormwater has come and it's picked up a lot of that soil, that sediment and silt, but the silt fence is actually holding it on site and not allowing it to run off to a nearby surface water, and therefore protecting water quality during the construction activity while the soil has been being disturbed. And there are other practices like that that are temporary to be used during the soil disturbance activity. And then many projects, if they are going to create some kind of impervious area, like on the right-hand side, you can see the buildings there, and then parking areas. These are all impervious areas that were likely a forest or field beforehand, and now stormwater will run off a lot faster and can pick up different pollutants from vehicles or whatnot. And so in the center of the image, there's a permanent control, a post-construction stormwater management practice that has been designed and built to receive the stormwater and treat it for water quality and slow it down, infiltrate it, and then slow it down running off site to protect the long-term site as well. But all is kind of the major requirement of the CGP is the SWIP, and this is kind of at the heart of the program. And so there's the SWIP itself, the plan, and then implementing it during construction, and then inspections and so on. But there are many more requirements with the program, but this is kind of big picture what it's all about. That's the basics. So it's a very brief section, the first section of this presentation, but just to summarize, we've covered what the CGP stands for, and it's the Construction General Permit within the DEC SPEEDs program, and it's applicable to soil disturbing activity. That's when it comes into play, and it's protecting water quality for surface water. And it does that by requiring these pollution prevention planning and control measures. That's a quick summary of the first section. And now we'll jump into the second section, which is the CGP web pages for the program. So the CGP program, we have two separate web pages. The first one being the stormwater permit for construction activity web page, and then also the construction stormwater toolbox web page. And we'll walk through the two web pages kind of highlight some key information accessible on each. So the first one, we can just refer to it simply as the CGP webpage, the stormwater permit for construction activity. Again, if you came on later, didn't hear me, we are recording this and we'll post this presentation, and we'll also post this the presentation itself so that you'll be able to go back through and access the links as you need to. But if you go follow that link to this webpage, it's a great starting point. From here, you can get all the information that you need about the CGP program. And on the page, there's a section in that screenshot that shows you what's on this page, and we'll walk through each of those sections right now. So the first section is just kind of an overview section of the program. It also gives a link to the other webpage as part of the program, the Toolbox webpage. And it also has a link to both a section about our Speedies permit program in general, and within that, there's a table for our general permit fees. We'll jump there for a second and look at that. So with this construction general permit, there are 2 fees associated with it. The first one on the screen you can see is an annual fee of $110 per year. And the second one is, and it says it there, it's a one-time initial authorization fee. And that varies depending on the disturbed acreage and the future impervious acreage. A quick note on that, if the project is owned by a some kind of government organization, the one-time initial authorization fee is waived. It's not required. A second note on these fees is they are sent out typically near the end of a calendar year. So sometimes into the next calendar year, like we just sent out invoices for fees for the 2024 calendar year. So if there was any soil disturbance in 2024 for a project and then it was terminated, if there was any disturbance during that calendar year, there's an invoice for the annual fee for that calendar year. So that's how it works near the end of the year. All right, jumping back to the CGP webpage, going to the second section of the webpage, it's the section for the permit document itself, where the CGP actually lives. You can click on that link and download the PDF and review the permit on your own there. Following that section, there's a section called supplemental documents. And the first 2 are really key. It's the fact sheet and the responsiveness summary. Those are very important documents, which we'll talk a lot about in the third section of this presentation a bit later. So I won't look at those right now, but just want to point out this is where they are, right beneath the permit document on this webpage. There are some other supplemental documents, but we'll especially highlight a few examples from the FAQs on permit requirements, that one. And then the last bullet is a summary of how the CGP applies to activity on agricultural property. We'll look at those right now. First is from the FAQ document. It's from 2006, so it's referencing GP02. So it does need to be updated in a lot of ways, but even so, many of the FAQs are still applicable today. So for example, on the screen, you can see FAQ number 4. Does a construction activity that discharges to a combined sewer require coverage under GP02? And the answer is no. Discharges to combined sewers do not require coverage under GP02. And that's the same for GP25. Discharges to combined sewers do not require coverage under GP25. That's one example of supplemental documents. Another example here is from the summary of how the permit relates to agricultural property. And some screenshots from that document show that stormwater discharges from the cultivation of crops do not require coverage under the CGP. And that's based on that Regulation 40 CFR Section 122.3E. So these, again, these are just some examples of supplemental documents and kind of what information is in those. So after that section, back on the webpage, the next section is called the process of gaining and terminating permit coverage, which kind of gives a broad outline of how to do just that. And it has information about like the application to obtain coverage, which we call the electronic notice of intent, or ENOI. And then when the project is done, how to terminate coverage using an ENOT, or electronic notice of termination. And there are different certification forms, signature forms with those. Those are all there. And those are submitted through DEC's online NFORM portal, NFORM, NFORM. And we have a link to that there. And there's information about how to access that and sign up for that. That's all in that section of the CGP webpage. So still on the CGP webpage, if you jump to the top, again, I said it earlier, but there's a link to the toolbox webpage, and we'll go to that one now. Similarly, there's a list on this webpage of what's on the page. You can kind of click down, jump down to a specific section. We'll walk through these, but before I do, just a quick tip that this webpage is really geared towards SWIP designers or construction site inspectors or MS4 operators who are doing construction site inspections or reviewing SWIPs. So professional engineers, registered landscape architects, CPESCs, which are certified professionals in erosion and sediment controls. This is really more technical information geared towards that community. I think many of the attendees today are kind of that audience, the key audience. So on this toolbox webpage, at the top, we have our two technical standards, technical documents, the Blue Book, which is the standards and specifications for erosion and sediment control. Back on that kind of CGP 101 like basics page, we had the two images. The silt fence on the left side was a temporary control. That's would be from the Blue Book for the erosion and sediment controls. And then on the right-hand side of that slide, we had the image of like a permanent control, and that would be from the design manual, the stormwater management design manual. So those are the two technical requirements that the permit refers to, and they have supplemental documents, just like the permit does on the other webpage. And then there are also technical tools on this webpage. There are several, but I just especially wanted to point out that there's a stormwater interactive map, and then runoff reduction worksheets for use with the design manual. There are more tools than just that, but just wanted to point those out in particular. And we'll look at the stormwater interactive map right now. We'll jump to that one. So if you go to this website, this stormwater interactive map, you can zoom in. It's interactive, like its name says. You can, for example, like Syracuse in the middle of the image there, you could zoom in on Syracuse, and if you have a site in Syracuse, you can look at the site and then click on different GIS layers that are pertinent for the program. So these here that I've highlighted on screen, these are CGP specific GIS layers. Other layers on this map are for the other DEC Speedies general permits, the MSGP and the MS4. So this is good for the whole Speedy stormwater program. But if you zoom in, you can use these layers to see site-specific CGP information. And I will point out that right now the CGP layer for impaired waters is still the GP020 layer, so that needs to be updated, which leads me to say that this is a useful tool. It's a helpful starting point, but the permit document actually controls. So like that layer, the impaired waters, it's ultimately has to be in the permit document. This is a great resource though, as a starting point to see what's on the map and how it relates to your site. Also on this stormwater interactive map, here's some helpful screenshots to see. We have a database of all historical owners and operators who obtained coverage under the CGP. And anyone in the public can use the stormwater interactive map following these 3 steps to download a spreadsheet either by year or by county, or you can get all available data to see what information we've received in an ENOI for a specific site. So that's very useful aspect of that tool, that website. Okay, back to the toolbox webpage. After the tools section, there's engineering schematics for both the Blue Book and the design manual. We have CAD files, DWG files, and some PDF files as well. And we have a section on proprietary practices, including some that have been verified for use for new development. There's a whole section on those. And we have a good deal of information about training and certification, including like our 4-hour erosion sediment controls training. Won't spend too much time on this. It's all on the webpage. You can look at it at another time. But also training and conferences, like different cooperative extensions and other learning activities. And that's all. So there's a lot of information, great wealth of information on the toolbox and the other webpage. So quick summary of that, just from that first CGP webpage, you can find all the information that you really need pertinent to the CGP program. It's all accessible from our web pages, and it's all there for you to see after this presentation. You can explore on your own time and see what's there. Okay, so that was the first two sections of the presentation, kind of bigger picture and the web pages where the information is to go find it after the fact. Now we're going to this will be the bulk of the presentation, diving into the 2025 CGP and walking through it. We'll go pretty much start to finish, beginning by just highlighting what the 2025 CGP administrative package is, and then as we go, we'll highlight some key things, especially the new 2025 ENOI and ENOT, both in N form. And as we go, we'll try to point out key changes, especially for, I know the majority of attendees were familiar with the 2020 CGP, the GP20 version. We'll try to highlight key changes that have been made in this now 2025 iteration or version of the permit. So first off, looking at the 2025 CGP administrative package, what we mean by that is we're referring to the permit itself, the 2025 CGP, its fact sheet, and its responsiveness summary. So these three documents make up the 2025 CGP administrative package. And it's like, what are they? How do they kind of work together? We'll simply put the permit controls, it's the permit, but the permit went out as a draft for public comment and review, and with it went out the fact sheet, kind of explaining what changes have been made and providing examples. So it kind of helps flesh out and kind of clarify the permit. And then through that public comment response process, there's the responsiveness summary document was made, where any public comment that was received during that public comment period is documented in it, and along with the comment is DEC's response. And it could have been like for example, a comment saying, hey, this doesn't seem right, could you please clarify? And we clarify, we made a change. Or it could be a question that there was no change and further reasoning is given or something like that. But so all together, they kind of work together to document, here's the permit, and with it is a fact sheet that gives kind of more further explanation, examples of how to understand it, what it means, along with the responsiveness summary, which gives further clarification from that public comment period and explains maybe further changes or further reasoning behind something, things like that. So a big tip is to not just read the permit itself, but look at this entire administrative package. So as you're reading through the permit and making sense of it section by section, also strongly recommend that you open up the fact sheet and look at the same section in the fact sheet, and open up the responsiveness summary and look at the same section, see if there are any comments and responses based on that section of the permit as you go. Okay, so we've covered the administrative package. We'll keep referring to these as we go, but now we're going to actually just go step by step through the 2025 CGP, starting with the cover. The cover page has a lot of information we've already looked at in the first section of this presentation, so we won't linger too long, but especially want to point out that the effective date is January 29th, 2025, and its expiration date is 5 years later. So it's issued for a 5-year term, and just like this replaced GP20, there will be a new version to replace this one at the 5-year mark. And ahead of that, there will be, just like this one, there will be a draft, and it will go out to public notice and for public comment. So they're issued for a 5-year term, and if you're interested and paying attention to it and have any opinions or questions, you can weigh in on that public comment review process during that time when it goes out again. All right, moving to the second page, there's a preface, and we covered a lot of this earlier, but kind of just the Clean Water Act, the NIPD, SPEEDs, kind of background of the permit and kind of its authority under New York State ECL or Environmental Conservation Law. On the preface, it also makes it clear that you need to obtain coverage before you disturb any soil. You can't go disturb soil and then get coverage. You have to get it first. And then in that screenshot at the bottom, there's this this bold note that any italicized words or phrases are defined in Appendix A. So that's a big tip here to point out, is just as you go through the permit, as you're reading it section by section, step by step, anytime you come across an italicized term, look up in the Appendix A of the permit what that definition is, so that you understand in context what you're reading. It's like a big example is here in the screenshot of the preface. It mentions construction activities, and if you go to Appendix A, you can find the definition for construction activities. And like we said earlier, about like kind of when is the CGP applicable, it's really concerned with construction activities, which is defined here as pretty much any kind of clearing, grading, as we were saying, that result in soil disturbance. And that's what the permit's concerned with. And we'll point out here that in the second paragraph of that screenshot on the screen, construction activity does not include routine maintenance, as defined in this definition of what routine maintenance includes. It's got a list of examples. The list is not included on the screen at the moment, but just want to point out, if you're doing something that's routine maintenance, according to this definition here, then that does not need CGP coverage. But otherwise, anything that meets the definition of construction activities that results in soil disturbance, that's where you have to look at the permit to see, do I need CGP coverage? Am I meeting a threshold, which we'll get to in a little bit. All right, after the preface, moving on to the table of contents. A quick tip is show where to get the permit on the webpage. Once you have it as a PDF, you could print it to paper, but if you're using it on your computer as a PDF, the table of contents is clickable. So you could jump to part 3, you could click part 3B, required SWIP contents, and it would jump to that section of the permit in the PDF version. You can also use the PDF bookmark function to navigate back and forth within the document. Just FYI, it's a useful tool. So the table of contents, we mentioned the fact sheet. So on the left-hand side, you can see from the permit a screenshot of the table of contents. On the right-hand side is a screenshot from the fact sheet. So this went out with the public notice, the draft version, but the point here is just, again, have these side by side. You can make sense of things. But again, the majority of the attendees today are familiar with GP20. So this screenshot from the fact sheet shows kind of where things have been relocated in GP25. And then most of it has been, if you see that on the right hand side, in like part 1 and part 2 of GP25 is where a lot of the changes have been made. But this is just a helpful kind of map of where some things moved around. The fact sheet itself continues to kind of give substantial changes, but this kind of just shows where some key things moved. And the reason we moved things around was just to make the permit more logical to read, kind of make more sense from start to finish. We pulled eligibility right up to the front because you have to start there. If you're not eligible, nothing else applies. It's irrelevant. So we really just made it more, the idea was to be more user-friendly and just to have a cleaner approach and more logical to read through the requirements. Part 3, part 4, part 5, and 6, those are all kind of the same. So again, it was more just the first couple sections that got reorganized for a more logical reading. So here's the full, an image of the full table of contents, and we will spent a lot of time in detail in part one, but we will progress as we go through this presentation through every part of the permit, and just cover every single part, but not necessarily every single page in detail. So again, today, hopefully you're getting the fishing rod and the fishing net, the tools that you need to go catch the fish that you're looking for, to go find the information you need. But we're going to keep progressing through step by step. So the next page is the beginning of part one, which is just how to obtain coverage and general requirements. And right from the start of part one, there's this sentence saying that to be covered under the permit, the owner operator has to be eligible. You have to meet the eligibility requirements in part 1A. And then there are requirements to obtain coverage in part 1D, F, or G. There's different avenues depending on submitting a new NOI or the transition from the previous permit or a change in owner operator. There's a nice little instructional sentence at the front. So moving to part 1A, eligibility requirements. There's a sentence at the front about a common plan of development or sale and phases. So at this point, I just want to, again, make a reminder that see Appendix A, the definitions for italicized terms. I want to make a note that the term phase is a newly defined term in GP 25. And with that, just a reminder to see the responsiveness summary section by section as we go. So at this point, we'll actually look at those just as an example. So in Appendix A, we have definition for common plan of development or sale. So this is basically if there's any announcement or piece of documentation that that construction activities may occur on a specific plot, then it's part of a common plan of development or sale. And their examples are like a public notice or hearing, or a marketing plan, a drawing, a permit application. It could be anything like that. And an easy example for this would be like a subdivision where like you have not just one single family home, but maybe 20 single family homes. So we've added the definition for phase, which is a defined area separate from other defined areas. So getting at like a footprint. So in that easy example of a subdivision as a common plan, one phase could be one lot or maybe 3 lots or something like that. So Appendix A has the definitions, which is very helpful. And again, see the fact sheet for examples. So phase being a new definition, we've given some examples in the fact sheet. So like this first example is if you're looking at your site plan and you draw a limit of disturbance around your site, and ends up being that rectangle on the screen, and you're going to do everything at once. It's just your project is one phase. So it's not a common plan. You're just doing one phase all at once. On the other hand, it could be the same size area. Maybe like that was 12 acres and maybe this is 12 acres, but your limit of disturbance entirely is that rectangle on the screen, but you're going to break it into 3 different components, phase 1, 2, and 3. And with that subdivision example, maybe you're going to do, 5 acres of single family homes for phase 1, get those built, sell those homes off, then do phase 2, then sell those off, then do phase, and you're breaking it up, but it's all part of that common plan. But each phase is referring to the footprint that is getting broken up into different components within that common plan. So the key point here is these examples are in the fact sheet, so it's helpful to refer here as you go through the permit, make sense of things. And then we also mentioned the responsiveness summary. So right now we're talking about language from part 1A, and this won't linger here too long, but just the point here is this comment that we received during the public comment period asked a question, could you please clarify this? And that's where, in response to that, we made this change. We put this language into the permit that we're talking about from part 1A, that sentence that talks about common plan and phases. So just an example of how that works and where that came from. All right, moving to part 1A1, soil disturbance. So this is like a very key focal point of the permit. And again, it's right up top, it's eligibility, and it's the first eligibility item. It's all about soil disturbance. That's when the CGP is concerned with your site. That's when you need to think about the CGP. And it says that then owners or operators construction activities that involve soil disturbances of 1 or more acres is eligible for the CGP. That's kind of the typical standard 1 or more acres, but it could also be 1B, which is less than 1 acre, which are part of a common plan of development or sale that will ultimately disturb 1 or more acres. Or it could be 1A, 1C, which is less than an acre, where DC is determined that a speeds permit is required. And with underneath C, there are several options, including, for those of you familiar with the previous version, the first one, 5,000 square feet or more in the east of the Hudson watershed, but also there are 3 new ones under there as well. But so the key point here is, this is a key point, and just want to drive this home. If this is where you start at the front of the permit, it's eligibility requirements. It's the first one. It's soil disturbance. If you have a site that is meeting one of these, then the owner operator must obtain CGP coverage or an individual speedies permit. And like I mentioned earlier, the CGP, it's a general permit. It's got standard requirements. It's more administratively efficient, easier to obtain coverage and maintain coverage and operate than to have to go through the process to get an individual speedies permit. But just a key point, if you have a site that meets one of these soil disturbance thresholds, it needs to obtain CGP coverage. These are kind of like the soil disturbance thresholds. You can think of it that way. And I just mentioned this, but want to point out as well that underneath C2, 3, and 4, these are all new for the, and they're relevant to the municipal boundaries of the city of New York. And so far, I've kind of given more specific examples from the fact sheet in response in the summary, but just to move along, now we'll just start saying, here's something new, but refer to those documents, refer to the whole administrative package, the fact sheet, and the response in the summary to learn more about kind of explaining where those came from and the information behind those new changes, additions. All right, moving to Part 1A2, we're still in eligibility. The second eligibility criteria is that Part 1A2, basically you can't have CGP coverage if you already have coverage under a different speedies permit and so on listed there. Part 1A3 is relevant to endangered or threatened species. And I want to point out here with Part 1A3, just on the screen, that's on the second screenshot on the bottom there. So if you may adversely affect these species, you must obtain a permit issued by 6 NYCR Part 1A2 for the project, or a letter issued by DC of non-jurisdiction. So just as far as like reading and making sense of the permit, this one is written that if you have either A or B, you've met Part 1A3. Just keep an eye out for like how to make sense of each permit requirement as you go. Part 1A4 is referring to historic property. If you have the potential to affect historic property, and it's related to SHPA, the State Historic Preservation Act. There's a lot more to Part 1A4 than on the screen, but basically, if you have this potential to affect historic property, you ultimately need some kind of documentation. And you can see the permit for the actual requirements, but it's Part 1A4A, B, C, or D. You need to have some kind of documentation to be eligible for CGP coverage. And again, going back to our CGP webpage, we have a lot more information there about SHPA and SHPA eligibility. This eligibility item is related to the New York State Office of Parks, Recreation and Historic Preservation, or OPRHP. And for example, we have a letter of resolution with OPRHP on the webpage there, and other helpful information related to that SHPA eligibility item on the webpage. Part 1A5 is related to seeker or SECRA. And if seeker is applicable, that seeker must be satisfied to be eligible. And to point out here, this is it's new as an eligibility item, but it's not new to the permit or to the program as like a concept. But for those of you who know or familiar with GP20, there was like a two-part eligibility then authorization component. You could submit the application, the ENOI, and get coverage under GP20, but not yet be authorized until you had satisfied seeker. So what's new in GP25, the 2025 CGP, is there's no longer a two-part piece. This is now an eligibility item. You're not eligible for CGP coverage unless you've satisfied seeker. And seeker just stands for the State Environmental Quality Review Act, or SECRA. And you can find out more about it from our webpage there. And related to seeker, we've added this new Part 1A6. There could be instances where seeker doesn't apply, it's not relevant, but there's something like equivalent that does apply, and so that has to be met instead. And again, you can like see the fact sheet for examples, and sheet for this section gives an example that there could be certificates of environmental compatibility and public need from the Department of Public Service, which would be different than seeker, but kind of the equivalent where that might be applicable. Part 1A7 is about UPA permits, or Uniform Procedures Act permits. Similar to the seeker, this with the old GP20 version, you could get coverage but not be authorized until you've obtained your UPA permits, but now this is different. It's the same concept of UPA permits, but it's now an eligibility item. You're not eligible unless you've obtained those. So you cannot obtain coverage until you've obtained those. It's all up front as an eligibility item instead in GP25. Part 1A8 is related to steep slope ineligibility, which is consistent with the previous version of the permit. And just a little bit ago, I was saying on one of those earlier eligibility requirements, it was this or that. But this is different. If you notice for Part 1A8A, underneath that, there's 1, 2, and 3. So it's within an AA watershed and undertaken on land with no existing impervious cover and disturbing 2 or more acres of steep slope. So to be ineligible, to be not eligible under Part 1A8A, you have to meet all 3 of those things. So as you read the permit, just look for those keywords and making sense of the criteria as you go. And just a reminder, so now we've defined steep slope. Like I said, this is consistent with what we had in GP20, but we've just cleaned it up by making a definition. There's a lot less extra language in this requirement here because it just looks cleaner now that it's been defined in the back. All right, so that was eligibility. Moving on to Part 1B is types of discharges authorized. And there are several sections within Part 1B. Part 1B1 talks about stormwater discharges that are authorized under the CGP. Including some like construction support activities, and like we've added asphalt batch plants, I think, based on a public comment from EPA. But a key point here is under Part 1B, these are the authorized discharges, and the only discharges, stormwater water discharges from the site that can be authorized are those listed in Part 1B. Onto Part 1B2, there are some non-stormwater discharges that are associated with construction activity that can be authorized, and they're listed on the screen. Like, for example, the last one is uncontaminated discharges from dewatering operations. If you have uncontaminated groundwater, you can discharge that with the CGP if it's part of the construction activity that you're doing. And Part 1B3, if you have a site covered by CGP near another site with a species permit and the discharges from both will commingle and they're both covered, then that's allowed as well. And again, anything that you're going to discharge from the site for it to be authorized under the CGP has to be listed here in Part 1B. These are the only types of discharges that will be authorized. Which is important to know when you go to Part 1C, it says prohibited discharges. But this is not an exhaustive list. Again, you think in the positive. To be authorized, you have to be in Part 1B, authorized discharges. This list is included. It's been included for many years. It's consistent with EPA's CGP, and it's just some common like construction activity discharges that are clearly prohibited, just just kind of really for convenience to say these are definitely prohibited. But this is not an exhaustive list. The permit doesn't list every discharge that is prohibited. It lists what is authorized in Part 1B. Okay, on to Part 1D. This is about the electronic notice of intent, or ENOI submittal. And at the start, there's this paragraph that this paragraph just describes what information the ENOI requests, because the ENOI is not in the permit itself, it's on our NForm portal. But this paragraph kind of says what the ENOI will include. So Part 1D1, this lists out what an ENOI may be submitted for. And again, I know the majority of attendees are familiar with the previous version, but if you're new, the ENOI is the application for coverage, so obtain coverage. And you may submit an ENOI if you are submitting it for one of these 4 options. And it can only be for one of these 4 options, Part 1D1, A, B, C, or D. So either it's for construction activities that are not part of a common plan under 1A, or the entire common plan under 1B, or you could, going back to the common plan phase definition terminology, you could submit an ENOI for a separate phase, but you have to meet the following requirements under C. The entire common plan has to meet the eligibility requirements of Part 1A 5 or 6, and so on, under C. And then I want to point out that Part 1D1D is new. And again, I'm not going to go into every detail of fact sheet responsiveness summary related to new things anymore, but just so we can get through all the material. But you can see in the whole administrative package more information about this. And it's the only option for an ENOI for tree clearing activity by itself. And it has to be related to a renewable energy generation, transmission, or storage project. And again, the fact sheet responsiveness summary share more about that. But otherwise, you cannot submit an application. You can't obtain CGP coverage just to cut trees down. You have to have A, B, or C. You have to have like an entire project that's prepared, and the SWIP has to be prepared for the entire site, from the tree clearing through the development through to final stabilization and everything being completed. All right, Part 1D2. So these are prerequisites for submitting an NOI. Before you can submit the application, the NOI, you need to have checked off these boxes. And the first one is preparing a SWIP, and then the other 2 are a SWIP preparer certification form and an owner operator certification form. So these are always required. You always need to have the SWIP that meets the Part 3 requirements, and you need those 2 forms. So the first form is the SWIP preparer certification form. It's now an Appendix F of the permit. And this gets submitted with the ENOI, along with answering all the ENOI questions. The actual SWIP documents can be very lengthy and long, and we don't receive those with the application. We just receive this, which is from the SWIP preparer. And it's hard to see on the screen, but there's a certification statement that the SWIP preparer is certifying that, like, basically the SWIP meets the requirements in the permit and the technical requirements, and it's been designed in accordance with those requirements. And then similar to that, every ENOI needs an owner operator certification form, which is an Appendix J of the permit. And so this is required with every ENOI, and it's also requiring a certification statement to be signed by the owner operator, basically that they are certifying that they've read and will comply with all the requirements in the permit in GP 25. So those are always required with an ENOI. There could be other documents required, which we're going to talk about now. And this is kind of a new section in the permit. And it's new because we received a lot of questions under the previous version of the permit about when does an MS4 operator have review authority, when do they need to do things. So we put all this in. Just to summarize kind of concisely what the requirements are. It starts with the question of, are you within the municipal boundaries of an MS4 operator, a traditional land use control MS4 operator, like a city, for example. And if you're within that municipal boundary, will you discharge to their MS4, to their system, the municipal separate storm sewer system? And if that's the case, then you need to determine if the MS4 operator has review authority, and it shows how to do that. And so basically, if you've determined through that process that the MS4 operator does have review authority, then the owner operator needs to obtain from the MS4 an MS4 SWIP acceptance form. Or if you're within New York City, there's one specific to New York City, but it's basically from the MS4 saying we reviewed the SWIP and we've accepted it, and you can move on with your application. So in Appendix G, we have the MS4 SWIP acceptance form, a 2-page document. The front page looks like that, which you'll have to submit to the MS4 operator and have them complete and sign for you to upload to the NOI. Or, like I said, if you're in New York City, they have their own version, which is a 2-page document, which we've included in Appendix H of the permit, which would have to be uploaded to the ENOI instead if you're in New York City. So that's if there was review authority, but if there's not review authority, if the MS4 operator does not have that review authority, then there's still documentation required, and it's a new form. It's the MS4 no jurisdiction form in Appendix G. So basically, either way, we're getting documentation from the MS4 operator, indicating that yes, we had review authority and we reviewed the SWIP and we've accepted it, or no, we didn't have review authority, and you can move on. So either way, they've been contacted and have weighed in on the project. So it's all new. So just kind of a summary again, just to reiterate, if it applies, so like if you're within the municipal boundaries of the traditional land use control MS4 operator, and you're discharging to their MS4, you need to first determine if they have review authority, and then whether they do or not, obtain the correct documentation from them, either that acceptance or the no jurisdiction form. And again, the fact sheet, response, and the summary have more about this information you can check out later. So we're still in Part 1D, Part 1D 3A. Once you've met those prerequisites, you've got your SWIP, you've got your SWIP preparer certification, you've got your owner-operator certification, and then if needed, if you have some kind of documentation from an MS4 operator, then you can go to actually submit the NOI using a DEC approved form. And like I said, it's accessible in our NForm portal. There's a link to it, and you can log in to NForm and find it there. When you get there in NForm, it looks like this. It's clearly labeled as the CGP ENOI for GP025. And you can click on Begin Form Entry. When you get into it, it will look like this. And it starts right at the front with eligibility questions. So you can see right there, we've covered Part 1A1 earlier, and it asks, will you involve soil disturbances in Part 1A1? And we'll have some, based on your answers, some conditionality might pop up with further questions as needed. So there are, in this ENOI, there are numerous sections, which you can see on the left. There's quite a few sections, and within each section, there are required fields as you go. And so like shown on the screen is some eligibility questions, the required questions. And just want to point out here, like if you say, no, I'm not eligible under Part 1A1 of GP025, then a pop-up will come up and say you can't submit this ENOI. Please, contact the region if you need help or something to that effect. But basically, the NOI, the application won't even allow you to submit it if you're not eligible. Which I'll get back to in a second. But so moving on to Part 1D 3B, once you've submitted your NOI, you've completed it, you've uploaded all the certifications, you submit it, then we move to Part 1D 3B, and we can see that the owner-operator is authorized to commence construction activity as of the authorization date indicated in the letter of authorization, or LOA, which is sent by DEC after a complete ENOI is submitted. So here's an example with some project information that's been redacted, but the template's kind of there. But if you submit an NOI, you'll kind of see the same template, but with your own specific project information where the black redactions have occurred. And key point here is it gives an authorization date when you're authorized to commence construction activity. And at this point, I want to point out that the letter note, it makes a note that the Speedy's permit ID will be sent separately, which is new. This is all new in GP25, new process. And we have a GP25 database that's being developed. And so currently we have a delay on getting those Speedy's permit IDs out. Once the database is up and running, we should have those out like within a business day from the time of an ENOI submission. But right now, we are experiencing a delay to get that up and running. So I've seen several people email me or reach out with concerns about that. The person who submits the ENOI will be getting the Speedy's ID in a separate email. It's the ENOI submission. It will be attached to the ENOI submission, so you can go back in and look at it in the ENOI, and it will also be sending an email to that ENOI submitter saying, here's your Speedy's ID. So those will be coming if you've submitted an NOI under GP25, up to date as of today or previously, it will be coming. Part 1D3B, this LOA, this letter of authorization. Here's just an example from the fact sheet, because this is a big one. This is a big change. It's replacing the Part 2C under GP20, which had an acknowledgement letter, which included a Speedy's ID. But that was an acknowledgement letter as a courtesy because there was like a separation between authorization and just getting coverage. So now everything is an eligibility item. So as soon as you submit the complete NOI under GP25, now you get this LOA and it gives authorization. So the old process of acknowledgement letters is gone. That was under the previous version, but now everything is an LOA or letter of authorization. It's a new process. So we're still on 1D3B and a different, like still in the fact sheet, but a different screenshot from the fact sheet. The old process had timelines. It had a 5-day timeline and a 60-day timeline. And now with this new process, like I was saying, that you can't even submit an NOI unless you're indicating that you're eligible. You've met all the eligibility requirements. So because of that conditionality that we've been able to build in electronically, we can automate the LOA issuance process. So if you submit an NOI to us today, you'll get an LOA today. So for the most part now, that means that we've eliminated the 5-day timeline. That's gone. So now it's like an immediate authorization. If you submit an NOI right now, you'll get an LOA kicked back and you're authorized as of today to commence construction activity. So just a quick pause on that. So I know I've said that the NOI, you can't submit it if you're saying no, you're not eligible, but so you have to answer that you're eligible and whatnot. But in this screenshot on the screen, it talks about GP25, the CGP being a self-certifying process. So here's just another key point, and just really big point is it's all based on self-certification. So when you submit the ENOI to us, you're certifying along with the SWIP preparer certification, the owner operator certification, and the answers in the ENOI saying, yes, I'm eligible, this project is eligible, we've met seeker, we've got UPA permits, whatever the eligibility criteria are that you're indicating yes. It's all self-certifying that we have met those things, we've done those things, we have the SWIP, it's been designed according to the technical standards and so on. And a big point with that is if there's any false certification, and even if the LOA is issued, there's not authorization. So authorization is contingent upon self-certifying where you're certifying correctly and accurately. So a false certification does not provide authorization, even if an LOA is issued. But if you've self-certified that you're correct and you've done everything correctly and you submit the NOI, you get your LOA, you are authorized to commence as of that authorization date. And the 5-day timeline is gone. It's all basically, it's across the board largely immediate, except for that 60-day time frame, which is still here. So if for part 1D3BI, and the fact sheet helps explain this, it's consistent with the previous version. Going back to those temporary controls versus permanent controls, which are based on the technical standards that we looked at on the toolbox webpage, the blue book and the design manual. The permit requires that designs be made according to those or equivalent. So if you are not doing it according to those technical standards, but you're going to demonstrate equivalence, you're going to deviate but be equivalent as defined by the permit, then that 60-day timeline still applies. So that if you submit an NOI indicating that you're deviating, you can still get the LOA immediately, but the authorization date in the LOA will indicate a 60-day timeline out based on the fact that you're deviating according to part 1D3BI. And again, that's consistent with the previous version of the CGP. And then part 1D3C, this is requiring that if the MS4 operator had provided SWIP acceptance, had signed off on the SWIP accepting it, then this is new as part of the LOA process. The owner operator has 5 business days from receiving the LOA to then go back to the MS4 operator, say, here you go, here's a copy of the LOA, we have coverage. So that just keeps the MS4 operator in the loop. They've signed off on the SWIP. They need to keep tabs of the different construction activities within their purview, and it helps keep that communication open. Since you had gone to them for the MS4 SWIP acceptance, they've accepted it. Now you got the LOA. You give that copy to them to keep that communication open. Okay, that was part 1D. Moving on to part 1E, this is called general requirements for owners or operators with permit coverage. So this section applies once you've obtained coverage. Once you've submitted the NOI and you have your LOA, then this section applies to you. It has requirements like keeping certain documentation on site, like a copy of the SWIP, like a copy of the LOA, things like that. And much of it's similar to the previous version of the permit. But so we won't go through every single detail of it, but I would like to highlight a few of them. Look at those right now. So part 1E2, this is just kind of like an FYI for like, along with like the logical restructuring of the permit, we've had some requirements like part 1E2, which was just a paragraph, and it was kind of reading the paragraph, it was maybe hard to see that there were like 2 steps to it. So it was just broken out to say you have to comply with all the CGP requirements and implement the SWIP until both final stabilization is achieved and you've met the requirements to terminate coverage. And it's just kind of formatting wise listed out more clearly. And there are other edits like that throughout, but just kind of an FYI on that. Part 1E6, this is a new process and it highlights kind of administratively how to how to obtain authorization to disturb greater than 5 acres of soil at any one time. So again, it's under part 1E. Once you've obtained coverage, then this requirement applies to you. Once you obtain coverage under the CGP, you can disturb less than 5 acres at once, but like 4.5 acres, you can disturb 4.5 acres of soil, do your construction activity. Once that's stabilized, you can move on to another 4.5 acres and then stabilize and move on and so on. But what you cannot do is disturb greater than 5 acres. You can't open up 10 acres, 20, whatever it might be, greater than 5 acres unless you've met the requirements in part 1E6. I won't go into detail on that, but just point out that it's there and you can check that out. There's a whole process of how to do that. And then part 1E9, we've compared to the previous version, we've kind of consolidated some requirements. Part 1E9 gives the administrative process now of if you've submitted an NOI, you've started your construction activity, you're going through your project, and you're making any kind of changes to your project based on anything's changing compared to what you had submitted in your NOI, then you need to follow this administrative process to update your NOI to make sure that the information is updated and current and correct. So just wanted to point out those few from part 1E, but again, there's more requirements from part 1E You can see the permit itself and the fact sheet and the responsiveness summary. Moving on to part 1F, this is related to the transition from GP20 to GP25, the previous version to now this version. There was a time frame of interim coverage period, which is now passed. So we won't linger on this too much. I will point out that right now on our CGP webpage, we have a yellow notice at the top with some information about the transition, about different scenarios, like whether you did submit a request to continue coverage form or not. This is all new in GP25. So for those who are familiar with the previous version, this is new, and the fact sheet and the responsiveness summary kind of give more, kind of flesh out more explanations for it. But kind of in a nutshell, we had always just allowed coverage to roll forward without any kind of action being taken by the owner operator, which led to a very large number, I think somewhere over 11,000 active construction sites in the state, many dating back years and years, and many just hadn't submitted the termination paperwork accordingly. So in large part, it was to clean up administrative records. It was also a new addition to kind of help have a touch point with the owner operator to say, hey, this is a new version of the permit. And so you need to make sure that you're still eligible, you're still meeting the eligibility requirements in GP25, and receive an updated owner operator certification form saying that, yes, you've read GP25 and you will comply with GP25 because it is a different version. It's a new version and it is the effective version. The previous version is expired and you have coverage under this version now. So you need to meet the requirements of this version. So again, our webpage has more information about that transition. I won't linger much on it, but it is a new process. And again, the administrative package, the fact sheet and the responsiveness summary kind of help tell the whole story with that. All right, moving on to part 1G. This is change of owner or operator. This is much the same as the previous version, consistent with it, but we have made changes of just making it more clear for the different scenarios of how, and the administrative process of how to do this. If you obtain coverage under the CGP, but now someone new is going to become the owner operator, how to completely transfer to someone new, or if maybe there's a common plan of development or sale and there's a subdivision and you initially owned the entire subdivision, but now someone's going to take over ownership on one part of it, or something like that. There are different scenarios, and this section of the permit walks through the administrative process of how to do that. So we won't linger on that or look at more details right now, but you can see the fact sheet and responsiveness summary for more information on those requirements. And then looking into part 2, this is water quality based effluent limitations. So we moved out of part 1 into part 2 of the permit. So the first line I've got up there, again, this section hasn't really changed much in terms of substance compared to the previous version. I know a majority of attendees are familiar with the previous version. If you're not, again, these are just like the tools for you to find more information. I'm not going to dive into all the details about maintaining water quality, but if you are new to the CGP program, you're learning about it, please read the permit in detail as you go. So just gonna move on without getting into too many details of weeds here, but we'll point out that in part 2C1, compared to GP20, we now in GP25 have the 2024 design manual as the kind of standard requirement for post-construction controls. There is an allowance for a transition period if you were using the 2015 design manual, if certain criteria apply, and we'll touch on that in part 3 a little bit later. But that's a big change here where the 2024 design manual is now required in part 2. So again, going back to the CGP 101 basics, there was that silt fence example of a temporary control, which would be from the Blue Book or the erosion sediment control standards and specifications, and then any kind of permanent post-construction stormwater management practice or SMP that would come from the design manual. So from these 2 technical documents accessible on our toolbox webpage. Part 3, moving on, is the SWIP, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan section. Similar to Part 2, a lot of it's very much the same as it was in the previous version of the permit. But there are several changes, and I'll call out some key ones. So these are key ones I want to highlight, and we'll walk through each of these. The first one is Part 3A2. This one is new, and it's related to climate change. This is a new requirement that every SWIP needing coverage. So any project that needs coverage under the permit needs to have a SWIP, and every SWIP will need this in it now under GP25. You need a consideration in narrative format of future physical risks due to climate change, and those risks are listed out in this section. And the fact sheet, the response to the summary have a lot more on this, but just want to point out a couple quick things about it. Is in the screenshot from Part 3A2, you can see the Community Risk and Resiliency Act, or CARA, C-R-R-A, referenced. So this had to be put into the CGP based on CARA. We had to have a consideration of climate change. Excuse me. And this is consistent with going back to our Speedies program and our other Speedies general permits. This is consistent with what we have in our other general permits under the Speedies program. Excuse me. And like I said, CARA is kind of the driving force. We had to put something in. We had put something out called like an advanced notice of proposed permit, trying to like gather some information on what to do about climate change, of how to do this, and kind of determined that we need to do more research and before we can put anything really prescriptive. So the key point here is the screenshots from the permit, and to meet Part 3A2, it says the SWIP must demonstrate consideration in narrative format of the future physical risks due to climate change. So keywords being demonstrate consideration in narrative format. So for each of those items listed, if you've done those things, if you've demonstrated your consideration in narrative format, then you've met Part 3A2. And there is an E&OI question about this to make sure that the SWIP does have this consideration. Again, see the fact sheet and response to the summary for more information about this. Okay, Part 3A5D, just briefly on this one. This was the intent under GP25, but just clarified with the phrase as-built drawing, so that must be included now. And just a clarification, and from our fact sheet for this portion, just want to point out that the fact sheet explains, you know, if you have a site drawing in the SWIP of this is our plan, and then you go ahead and you do exactly that, you can build off of that site drawing to make your as-built. You know, you can save a copy as an as-built drawing because it was designed according to plan. Here's our as-built. So again, just FYI, look at the fact sheet, look at the response in the summary. There's helpful examples in those documents. All right, Part 3B1C2. You know, just FYI, there's a few items added to the list there of what a site map requires, like north arrows and receiving surface waters. And in Part 3B1C4, there's some new information about what's required in the SWIP. The SWIP now requires like a phasing plan and sequencing plans. So phase is now a defined term. It's that footprint area in a common plan. And that easy example being a subdivision, it could be one lot or a couple lots at a time before you go on to other lots. So that a phasing plan is like what you have for a common plan, the different phases, how you're going to proceed in different footprints across an entire larger site, larger common plan. But for within each phase, there needs to be a sequencing plan. So like a sequencing plan could be, for example, in basic terms, you've put up your erosion sediment controls first, then you're going on to tree clearing and then grading and whatnot. You kind of all the way up until final stabilization and things like that. So that's new. You can check those out, those requirements in Part 3B1C4. And again, I said it a lot, just keep saying it, that the fact sheet and the response in the summary help flesh all of this out. And you can, for each section, refer to those same sections in those documents as well. Part 3B, 2B3, I mentioned it briefly earlier, but this is new and it has requirements. We won't look at it in detail, but it lists out specific requirements where if you had designs kind of made using the 2015 design manual for a set amount of time, if you meet those requirements, you can still use that design without having to go back and redesign the SWIP if you've met those requirements. So you can see the actual permit requirements, and then the fact sheet response in the summary, for example, is about how to make sense of that if that's something that you think applies to you. Otherwise, like we said earlier, any new ENOI needs to be designed according to the 2024 design manual if there is that post-construction component required. Which leads to part 3C, which is required SWIP components by project type. So back to that CGP 101 basics, there's the temporary controls, the permanent controls, and basically if any project that needs CGP coverage, it needs to have a SWIP, and all SWIPs need the temporary controls. But some might also need the permanent controls. So how do you determine what's needed? And this is a very important new paragraph. This paragraph was added. We noticed, especially in the public comment period, that there is apparently some confusion in the public of how to make sense of the permit and interpret the permit from start to finish, including the Appendix B tables. So this paragraph makes it very clear that as it says there, the SWIP, it must include the erosion sediment control component. Every SWIP needs that. But then there's also a potential to require the SMP component, which is the permanent control component, those post-construction stormwater management practices, or SMPs. So the fact sheet gives more, the responsiveness summary gives more, but basically you look at Appendix B, tables 1 and 2, which we haven't gone to yet, but we'll get to those. But you look at those and all the bullets in those tables, and if your site is just completely activity that's in table 1, you just need erosion sediment controls. You don't need the post-construction component. But if you maybe have a couple bullets from different tables, if you have any bullets listed on the table 2 from Appendix B, those activities within your site, those activities require that post-construction component. So you have to look at each thing case by case as you go. So again, I mentioned there was confusion that we identified in the public comment period process. So this new paragraph's been added, is very important. And this key point here is, this is how you make sense of the permit. We reorganized it to be more logical, put eligibility right up at the front. So part 1A1, you have to be eligible. You look at those soil disturbance thresholds. If you're disturbing typically an acre or more, or those other items in part 1A1, then you need CGP coverage. That's where you start. That's just saying you need coverage. Once you know that you need coverage, the next line there under the key point, to obtain that coverage, you have to have a SWIP. Every project needs a SWIP that's getting coverage under the CGP. Then we come to here, what we're talking about right now, part 3C. Okay, so I know I need coverage. I know I need to make a SWIP. What does my SWIP need to include? What components? And you come to this paragraph and you look at Appendix B, tables 1 and 2, to determine which components are required in your SWIP. So that's how you make sense of the permit and kind of work through it logically to determine what the SWIP requires. All right, moving on to part 4, inspection maintenance requirements. Like the other part 3 and part 2, much of this is very similar to the previous version or consistent with it, but there are some changes that we'll point out just like those other ones. Just a few here to highlight, and we'll go to those. So part 4B1 and 4C5 relate to corrective actions by the trained contractor or the qualified inspector. And again, if you're, I know the majority of people are familiar with GP20, you know what I'm talking about when I say those terms. If you're new to the permit, please read the permit, but it requires that there be a trained contractor and a qualified inspector. And if there are any kind of deficiencies, they need to make corrective actions. So new, that's not new, but what is new is there are now specified timeframes for when those corrective actions must be completed. And again, fact sheet, responsive summary, they share more about these new requirements. Part 4C, 2C, and D. If consistent with the previous version, if you're going to have some kind of temporary shutdown, often for like winter shutdown, there was a requirement to notify either the DEC or MS4 operator of the shutdown. That's not new, that's consistent, but what is new is now there's also a requirement to notify again before recommencing or resuming. Again, just to keep that communication channel open. So just a minor change there. Again, the fact sheet and the response in the summary have more about that. Part 4C4 is some new things here is just reformatted like other places in the permit. There's been some reformatting, but also some additional items have been added to what is required in an inspection report, a qualified inspector inspection report, if that is required. If you need a qualified inspector, you need to have these requirements be met of what goes into their inspection reports, and there are some new items in that list of what's needed. Won't go into details, but the permit itself can be looked at, and the fact sheet and response in the summary. Just wanted to point those out. Part 5 is how to terminate CGP coverage. Like the previous sections we've been talking about, very similar, but there is the big change here is new. The previous version of the permit did not have an N-form NOT, it just had a paper copy. So new with this GP25, there's this electronic notice of termination, ENOT, and it's also an N-form just like the ENOI. Again, here's the link for it, and this will it's already been being used, and it's a lot more efficient. It's very similar to the NOI. You get into N-form, and the descriptive name is CGP ENOT for GP025. Click on begin form. Similar to the ENOI, there are different sections, and in each section there are required fields. Again, also based on self-certification. So once all the required fields are entered and you submit it, you can send it through. If you don't provide the required information, it won't come through, won't be complete. But once you fill it out and submit it to us, according to Part 5A, the owner-operator's coverage is terminated as of the termination date in the LOT, a letter of termination that will be sent by DC once you submit the ENOT. So just like the ENOI, you submit the ENOI, you get an LOA, a letter of authorization. Likewise, you submit an ENOT and you get an LOT, a letter of termination. So that gives, just like the LOA, it is automated. It gives you an immediate confirmation that we received your ENOT, and you have the confirmation in hand that coverage has been terminated. So like the example I gave of the LOA, here's kind of the template it looks like with some project-specific information redacted. So if you submit an ENOT, you'll get one of these kicked back to you. It's the LOT, letter of termination, with the key information there of the termination date based on when you submit the ENOT to us. And that's all new. So that was part 5. Part 6 is record retention and reporting. Part 6 was renamed, just to be more clear in its naming, but otherwise it's substantially the same as it was previously. You can check it out in the permit and the fact sheet response and summary, what's in that section. Part 7 is standard permit requirements. Again, going back to the Speedies program and the other Speedies general permits, this was reorganized and edited to be consistent and similar with those other permits. And that, again, that's like standard for across the Speedies program. It's not just specific to the CGP, but those are standard requirements. And like everything, the fact sheet, response, and the summary kind of give further explanation and kind of rationale and further information about what was done with those sections. Appendix A is abbreviations and definitions. We mentioned definitions, but I don't think I pointed out that it also has abbreviations that are used throughout the permit. So we did make changes and additions here. We've already pointed out some of them. Like phase is new. We've highlighted that one. Or we've made changes to other definitions and the abbreviations. but we're not going to go into any more detail here. You can see all the changes in Appendix A itself and in the full administrative package. Appendix B, we mentioned this when we were looking at Part 3C, and this Appendix B is the required SWIP components by project type. So we did make changes here to the actual tables 1 and 2. Like a big example is we added some bullets that are specific to solar, like a solar array field area. On a side note with that, we have within Division of Water, we have a different section than what I work in called GEMS, or Green Energy Management section. And they're working on like a solar education kind of PowerPoint presentation to kind of be rolled out related to the CGP and to this kind of information. But the tables look like this. We didn't just make this, there are other changes made to the tables than just the solar array field area changes, but wanted to point those out in particular. But table 1, like we said, this is just erosion and sediment controls type projects. If you're listed on table 1, that's all you're doing. You just need a SWIP with erosion sediment controls. If you have anything on table 2, it also that would need a SWIP with SMPs, those post-construction stormwater management practices. And you might have a bigger project that is like a couple different things from the different tables. So again, going back to Part 3C, if you have that kind of scenario going on, you look through all the bullets, any bullets that fall under table 2, in addition to having the erosion sediment control component, you also need the SMP component for that. And the new ENOI has a question to that effect of like, if any portion of the project falls under table 2, then the SWIP needs the SMP component, and you have to answer accordingly and have that component for that portion of the project. Again, the administrative package, the fact sheet, and the responsiveness summary, they can flesh out everything in better detail with more explanations and examples and changes and things that were made in the public comment process. Appendix C, for those of you who know GP20, it's the same as it was. For those of you who are new to the CGP program, making sense of it, you can see Part 3B3. It kind of refers to this appendix and kind of clues you into when it comes into play in the permit. Won't linger on that right now, but Appendix D is impaired water bodies. And this it's the same concept as it was previously, but the list has been updated. So it's the same concept as before, but the list has been refreshed. It was updated with the data that was the most current at the time that the draft permit went out to public notice. So that's the data that we used, as you can see on the screen. Appendix E is a list of our DEC regional offices. It's pretty simple here, but we just updated contact information as we needed to. It's FYI. And then to finish up the walkthrough through the permit, the other appendices, F, G, H, I, and J, these are all new. We covered them earlier in the presentation, though. They're the certification and acceptance forms that we looked at previously. They're all now in the permit itself, went out to public notice as part of the permit in the appendices. So now we walk through the whole permit from the start to the finish. And before just wrapping up this section, I wanted to just point out we've received a few kind of frequently asked questions about a few specific citations in the permit. We've received several questions on these, so just want to try to share the information broadly. So the permit, like we're talking about from GP20 to GP25, it was public noticed, the draft, and then the new one was finalized and issued, and GP20 is now expired. GP25 is effective. So it's effective for a 5-year term, but we could modify it sooner, and we might try to do that. Hopefully, I don't know a definitive timeline, but hopefully this year we might modify it to correct a few things or provide clarifications. And I'll just point out a few specific things like that. For it to be modified, it would have to go to public notice, just like previously, and go through that process. But we'll just look at each of these. Part 1D, 3BI. So just FYI, the intent of this, we covered it earlier. the 60-day review. So most of the time you submit an ENOI and you get your LOA, your letter of authorization. Most of the time you'll have immediate authorization that same day. But like I said, if you're deviating from one or both of those technical standards, and you don't have MS4 SWIP review and acceptance, that the intent of that portion is that's when it applies. The way it's written, we've received a few questions, just there's been some confusion. So we just need to clarify how that's written. But the fact sheet, page 12, and the responsiveness summary, comment and response number 47, make the intent very clear that I've got up on the screen. So that's the only time it will apply. And that's how the ENOI is functioning. If there's any concern, the ENOI is functioning based on the intent. So you will only have that 60-day timeline if you are deviating from those standards and there is not MS4 SWIP review and acceptance. The next one is really simple, part 1E6B3. That part, if you go to there in the permit, it references part 3B1D, but that's a typo. It should be referencing part 3B1C4. So just FYI, it's a typo. If you're looking at that part, that's the correct reference. That will need to be updated. And then the third frequent question is just from Appendix B, Table 2. We just need to add some clarification to a specific bullet. So you can see this, the top screenshot, single family home located in one of the watersheds listed in Appendix C, yada yada. That one is from Appendix B, Table 2, and we need to add to that the phrase that involves soil disturbance of 1 or more acres of land. Because right now it looks like it's conflicting with the screenshot on the bottom from Table 1, which is correct. So if you have a single family home in the New York City watershed east of the Hudson River, and you're doing a project like that, between 5,000 square feet and 1 acre of land, you do need CGP coverage. Go back to part 1A1 and look at there. There is a requirement for coverage, but if you're doing a single family home, it falls under that Table 1 bullet as only needing the erosion sediment control component in the SWIP, which is why we need to add that clarifying language to the top screenshot in Table 2. So again, those are just FYIs. We've been getting a couple of questions. Just wanted to share that information broadly. So that wraps up that third section of the presentation. It was a lot of information, but in some, read the permit itself, go through the permit. As you do, look at the definitions in the appendix, and also look at the fact sheet. Look at the same section in the fact sheet for the section you're reading, and likewise in the responsiveness summary. And that will help you understand the requirements as you go. And with that, hopefully you get the sense, I know it's a ton of information that we shared, but again, we're recording this. We'll post this recording. We will also share this presentation so that you can go back at your own pace and go into the links, go through the information. But again, it's this presentation isn't like the answers, it's the actual permit controls, is the document, and it's the fact sheet, the responsiveness summary. They're all on the CGP webpage. And hopefully you have those tools now to go find the information that you need going forward. Hopefully you have the fishing rod, not just a fish. So that was kind of all technical information. I'll just wrap up the presentation part with sharing some contact information. So first up, there's a link here for our different DEC offices. We have regional offices throughout the state, including one in Albany where I am in the central office. So I work out of central office, but at kind of like a higher level with the CGP program. If you have if you have a question specific to any project, you're trying to get CGP coverage, or you have a question about a specific project that has CGP coverage, please contact the DEC region where the project is. And there are regional staff who implement the CGP and are more the boots on the ground, and will go out to sites and do inspections as needed or things like that. Again, on the screen, you can see a map of our different offices. That's the go-to place for a project-specific question. If you have any other questions, like kind of bigger picture with the CGP program, you can reach out to us in central office. There's that stormwater_info email account that is on the screen, and our kind of general Bureau of Water Permits number there for the stormwater program, the construction program. I know many attendees, we had sent out, we have this CGP mailing list for announcements related to the CGP program. And we used that to let folks know about this webinar. And we used that stormwater info email account to send that out. We've been including in those emails that if anyone wants to be added to that mailing list, to please email stormwater info. You can also email me about that. I'll share my information in a second, but that mailing list is we're trying to reach as many people as possible. So please distribute that those emails widely so that anyone who's interested or would like to be kept in the loop on CGP announcements as we send them out. We don't send those out all the time, but anytime there's something big like when the permit became effective, we put those out, or this webinar, for instance. We plan to use that to share information with the public, especially interested parties who are using or who are kind of implementing this program and working with owners and operators regularly. So, so again, project specific question, ask a DEC regional staff, contact the region. Otherwise, as I said at the start, my name is John Muthersbaugh. I work in Albany Central Office. Here's my contact information, my direct phone number, my email address. You can certainly reach out to me or the stormwater info or the general number. I will respond to you as soon as I can. I do want to point out that my information is out there, and I do receive a high number of emails and phone calls, and I do try to be as responsive as possible, but so I do plan to respond to you. Just FYI, I do receive a high number of inquiries, but you can certainly reach out to me. Happy to help address any broad questions you have about the CGP. But like I said, if you're asking about a project-specific question, I find that out, I'll help connect you with regional staff who can help answer you based on where your project is. I can stay in the loop as needed, but again, I'm in central office, kind of a bigger picture, the CGP program as a whole, and especially ENOI, ENOT kind of administrative questions with that sort of thing, or updating the ENOI as you need to at certain points in the future. So that wraps up the presentation. Again, if you didn't get my contact in time or anything, we will have all this information. We're recording this, putting it up. We're also going to share this presentation online so that you can access all this information later. So that wraps up for our webinar, the presentation portion of it. So now we'll move on to a 10-minute break. And after the 10-minute break, we'll go into, I think we've been getting some questions coming in, and we'll have a Q&A portion where we will go through questions and try to answer all the questions that come in. So what is it, about 48 right now? 148 or so?
Yes, 148.
Okay. Okay, so we'll give it about 10 minutes and we'll come back I'll turn off my camera for now and mute, and we'll be back in 10 minutes for Q&A. All right, thanks. Hey, hi everyone. If you're still with us, we're gonna move on from our break now to a Q&A time, and I'll allow Dan to introduce himself here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dan Ronchogan and I work with John in the CGP program here in central office. Just going to start reading out questions we got in chat, and I'll try to answer them to give John a little bit of a break from speaking for an hour and a half, and he'll probably chime in as required. So first question is, can you point out where in the NOI an applicant would insert/reference an old Speedy's permit number if they're amending an old SWIP for a new project? This is not a change of owner operator. So the NOI has an additional information section at the very end. You can add in any pertinent project information you need. I will say if you are amending a SWIP for an existing project with Speedy's coverage, you may not need to submit a new ENOI. You can contact that stormwater info inbox or John directly, and we can kind of work that out with you. Next question is, if New York State DEC is completing a project, so they're the applicant for coverage under the CGP, shouldn't the fee be waived since New York State DEC would simply be paying New York State DEC? So the IAF, the initial authorization fee, would be waived because New York State DEC is a government entity, state entity. Same applies for federal agencies or municipalities. The annual fee would still apply. I know it kind of doesn't really make sense, but depending on our division program, money comes from different buckets. So it's not really just like going from one bucket back into the same bucket in every case. But yeah, so the IAF would be waived, but the annual fee would still be owed for that project. Next question is about the NOI databases on the Stormwater Interactive Map. Just how often are those updated? I believe the schedule right now is every 2 weeks or so. We have been looking at making it more frequent, and you can expect to see those updated initially once the new database is up and running. We'll have all the new GP25 submissions on there as well. Next question is about Stormwater Interactive Map. Has New York State DEC considered including design storm contours for 90%, 110, and 100 years events to the Stormwater Interactive Map so designers can accurately determine applicable rainfall values for specific locations? The figures in Chapter 4 are imprecise.
Yeah, those. So that question relates to the design manual. So Chapter 4 is referencing the design manual. So that, to my knowledge, we have not considered putting anything like that on the Stormwater Interactive Map. That would just be what you find in the design manual is what you need to go by to meet those requirements.
What is the status of projects that had coverage under a previous version of the CGP but did not apply for continuation of coverage under 2025 CGP? So if your project had coverage under GP20, you didn't submit an RCC or request to continue coverage for GP25, that project would currently not have permit coverage. You should submit a new NOI for that project to gain coverage, so you're not operating that site without a permit. Next question, can the ENOI be linked to the Stormwater Interactive Map? That way we can select our site or input an address and autofill a lot of information. Example being city, state, zip, DEC region, county, tax map, lat longs, Appendix C watershed, AAS watershed, MS4, TMDL, etc. I'd say currently no. It's kind of a technical limitation with kind of how these forms are built and the system they use. They don't accept kind of outside information, especially from like a GIS system easily. It might be something we could accomplish in the future, but I wouldn't be able to say we could commit to that for this permit term even. So maybe in the future, that's something we could work out, but not right now. If you have a project that has multiple phases, i.e. subdivision, are you able to submit an E&Y for phase 1 only, even if you have a future phase that requires a UPA permit that is not yet obtained? I believe the answer to that is yes, as long as your entire common plan meets the eligibility conditions for seeker or the equivalent to seeker. So if your entire common plan has gone through the seeker process and that's been satisfied, if required, you can submit an E&Y for just your phase 1, as long as the phase 1 has any required UPA permits.
Right. So I pulled up for Dan part 1D, part 1D1C is what we're talking about. You have to meet these requirements. So Dan was saying seeker or the equivalent for the entire common plan. That's this one. Then the phase itself has to have all other eligibility requirements where the UPA would fall under, as Dan was just saying. And then this applies, we were talking about part 3C earlier and about Appendix B, Table 1 and 2, which component applies. For the SWIP, you have to consider the entire common plan when you make that determination. But if you've met these requirements, then you can submit an E&Y for one phase, even if a later phase hasn't yet obtained its UPA permits.
Are there instances where coverage can be obtained, but we can't file through N-form? So the E&Y should allow for any scenario where CGP coverage would be needed. If you are having issues with N-form, you can contact our N-form support or the stormwater info inbox, and we'll connect you with N-form support. There is a waiver for owner operators who maybe have some religious reasons for not using technology. You can submit a waiver through the kind of national process there, and we can work out a way for you to submit for coverage without having to use N-form. But every other case, you should be able to submit through N-form, the E&Y or your ENOT. What if there is a 1.6 acre project where only 0.4 acres are disturbed at any one time? Roadway maintenance that needs to remove 8-inch of subbase. Would this require CGP coverage? If your common plan there's meeting one of these thresholds, so over an acre, I'd say yes, you need CGP coverage.
Yeah, so on that, so looking at part 1A eligibility requirements and these soil disturbances. So these disturbances are referring to the entire project. So I forget the exact number that the question just said, but so 1.6 is the entire, that's the entire soil disturbance. So that's what you're looking at here, entire soil disturbance. Even if it's like 1B here, a common plan, the common plan would be 1.6, even if you're starting with 0.4 or whatever the number was. So that's like the the answer for that part of the question about soil disturbance. You look at the entire common plan and you look at that soil disturbance coming here to the soil disturbance thresholds. But then there was the portion of the question that related to roadway maintenance. So if you jump down to Appendix A definitions, and you look at construction activities, we shared this in the slideshow earlier, but it cut off this list of examples of routine maintenance. So what did the question, there was a specific phrase in the question about milling. Okay, so anything like if you're going to the subbase, so the short answer is look at this list. If it is routine maintenance, then it doesn't need CGP coverage. But if it doesn't meet this definition of routine maintenance, then it will need CGP coverage. And there are also some on our CGP webpage. some one of the FAQs. I forget if it's the permit FAQs or the technical FAQs, but specifically about like sub-base and routine maintenance, there are some FAQs specific to that, which help flesh that out as well. So I guess in the context of this Q&A, just kind of keeping it broader without giving a very specific answer for your specific project, take the concept of look at these definitions. Is it routine maintenance? Then you don't need to do anything. If it's not, if it's construction activities, go back to part 1A1 for the entire common plan.
When can we expect an NYR number for a project that has received a letter of authorization under GP 025001? So your NYR number or your Speedies ID, mentioned this in the presentation, we are slightly delayed in getting those out, because of a delay with our database. So you can expect to see those in maybe another month or so. I don't want to give a hard deadline and then miss it, so we'll say in about a month. But once that is kind of up and running, you can expect to see them in 1 or 2 business days. And that's just because we have to wait for our NOI information to get pulled into the database.
I'm just going to add on to that. We know we've gotten some questions, especially in New York City. When New York City DEP is involved, they require the Speedies ID. I've been in touch with New York City and they've made a workaround, so you can contact them directly. They have a current workaround. I don't have their exact contact information off the top of my head, but if you reach out to them, they'll give you instructions for what to do. But I think basically right now they're allowing you to use your ENOI submission ID temporarily until you get your Speedies ID, and then once you get that, to give that immediately to them instead. So that's a workaround for that. And also seen with regional DEC staff, there's been at least one request to disturb greater than 5 acres, which the permit requires that you, with that request, you submit the permit ID. Just reach out to your regional staff and they can follow the same approach where in the short term, you can use your ENOI submission ID until we can get our Speedies, our database up and running to be able to generate those Speedies IDs, because that's on our end, not up and running yet.
Why has DEC separated the LOA, letter of authorization, and NYR number into 2 distinct issuances? So the LOA is automated based on your ENOI submission. So that is to get the authorization out right away. The NYR number, there's a bit of a wait for the NYR number just because of technical reasons. So once the information is submitted to us, it has to be, the Speedies ID is generated in a separate data system. And there's not a nice way for those to communicate kind of back in the other direction. So that's why there's that 1 business day delay there. The other way is your authorization to discharge. So once you have that, you can start construction activity.
And I'll add on to that, under the previous version of the permit, with the old process of the acknowledgement letters, those courtesy letters, they had the Speedies ID, but because they had the ID, like Dan was saying, there's this technical kind of hurdle to get that internally for our organization. So it led to delays to get those letters out. And through the public comment period and comments, that there was a strong concern to not have those delays and, you know, for authorization to be issued. So we opted to take the approach to have the most efficient, most streamlined approach, where those letters of authorization, those LOAs, are automated so that you have that letter immediately upon ENOI submission, so that you can take it and run with it, and you're not waiting for any kind of delay on our end to be able to, like Dan just said, have the authorization to commence construction activities. And then this is just like a one-time, as we build this new database and get it developed and implemented, we have this delay. But like Dan said, like I said earlier, once the database is up and running, it should be very prompt. It should be typically within a business day, we'll get that Speedies ID sent out to you as well. So it was all within the intent to streamline the process and make it more efficient, and to eliminate those delays that we had in the past for authorization to go.
Can the LOA be sent automatically to applicable MS4s at the same time that the permittee receives authorization? So as soon as the owner operator receives that LOA, they have 5 business days to send it to the MS4 operator if their review of the SWIP was required. So it's the owner operator's responsibility to make sure that the MS4 gets that letter again. If you're talking about having NForm send it to the MS4 operator, that's not a functionality that we have implemented currently. So that's currently not possible. So it's on the owner operator to make sure that information is provided. Can QR codes be used for electronic document accessibility? This is, I think, talking about on-site documentation required by the permit. I know we've talked about this before. I don't fully remember the answer, but I think John can chime in.
Yeah, so I just scrolled down to Part 1E, general requirements for owners or operators. Part 1E5 requires that the documents, there's a list of documents here in 3 and 4. It's like you need eligibility documentation, the permit, SWIP, certification form, all these things, and same in 4 when they become available, like these different documents listed, like inspection reports. And 5 here says you have to maintain all these documents in a secure location on site, and it must be accessible. And we've added to this that they must be paper documents unless electronic documents are accessible to the inspector during inspection to the same extent as a paper copy stored at the site would be. So if you have like some kind of device that, so if you have a QR code on your site and you have some kind of device that can scan it and show it to an inspector, some kind of electronic functional equipment on site for that, then that's fine. But most likely you'll probably just have a computer with it. But again, it has to be like accessible to the inspector, and you have to provide the owner operator has to provide the functional equipment, and they have to maintain that on site and have it available to the inspector during those normal hours of operations, that they can see it in a format that's equivalent to a paper document. So that's like the official answer, like kind of the looking at specifically QR code. If you just put up a QR code, but you don't have any of this equipment, then you've not met this requirement. So like kind of the complete answer is just meet this requirement. And how you choose to meet this requirement is up to you, as long as the requirement is met.
Does NOI need to be submitted for projects required to meet the substantive requirements of the program? Example being New York State Superfund with direct DEC oversight. In the past, DEC has required NYSDEC approval, but not issued permit coverage. So if your activity is entirely the remediation work under that remediation plan, you're not doing any like development past the remediation, you don't need CGP coverage, and we don't need an ENOI submission for that. If you are doing work in addition to the remediation, you're doing the cleanup work and then you're maybe putting a parking lot over it or something like that. Any of that development needs to be covered under the CGP if it meets the eligibility requirements.
And just another add-on for what Dan just said, our new GP25 ENOI kind of helps screen out some of those questions. So as you go through the questions in the ENOI, it will kind of prompt you whether or not to submit the NOI. But kind of in a nutshell, like what Dan just said, if we're not going to be issuing speedies coverage under the CGP, then an ENOI should not be submitted. But if you do need CGP coverage, then yes, you need to submit the ENOI to obtain that coverage.
If the project construction activity greater than an acre will not impact the waters of the US, would coverage under GP for construction be required?
I might need to hear more on that question or like specifics. There is in one of our FAQ documents, I think it might be permit requirements. There are two FAQ documents on the different web pages, one for technical and for the permit, like we talked about. There are rare occurrences where there's one of those FAQs, if you're like in a geographical bowl that doesn't have like any surface water or something, and there's a whole list of requirements, like basically even in frozen flooded conditions, if there will be no chance for a discharge to surface water, then you don't need CGP coverage, because it is the purpose, as we said, is to protect water quality and for surface water. But that's a very rare occurrence. I think it has happened on occasion, but you could reach out to me directly, and you can also look at the FAQ documents for that. But if you have a specific site like that, reach out to your regional staff, the DEC regional staff, and we can help look at that with you specifically for whatever specific scenario you're dealing with for that site.
Next question says, just to clarify, the 2025 CGP Part 1A1 now basically dictates any New York City project that triggers the New York City DEP stormwater construction permit requirements, being 5,000 acres new impervious or 5,000 square feet new impervious or 20,000 square feet total disturbance, will also require state CGP coverage, even if that total disturbance is less than an acre. Does this apply to separate sewer areas only or combined sewer areas now as well? Previous CGP outlined that combined sewers drain to treatment plants, i.e. not directly to surface water, which is why coverage under CGP was historically not required for CSS area projects. So we do have those lower thresholds in New York City municipal boundaries. We'll say nothing has really changed with regards to combined sewer from the previous permit. So if you are discharging to combined sewer, that kind of watershed area of your site that is discharging to that combined sewer does not need to be calculated as part of your total disturbance. So you can separate them out. So if your entire site goes to combined sewer, you wouldn't need state CGP coverage. If you have kind of a partial discharge to combined sewer, just subtract that from your disturbance area. And if your remaining area still meets any of those soil thresholds, depending on where you are in the state, you would need CGP coverage for those areas if you meet those requirements.
Mm-hmm. And again, this one is also in the ENOI conditionality of the questions. There's a question about combined sewer to help guide guide you through that as you answer the questions in that. And in the presentation early on in that the section on the web pages, we looked at an example from the FAQ on permit requirements, which just affirms what Dan was just saying. If it's to combine sewer, it does not need CGP coverage.
Can New York State DEC send an electronic copy of the LOA and NYR number to the approving MS4? So again, it's the owner operator responsibility to meet that permit requirement. So I'll just say as soon as the LOA is available to them, the owner operator can send that over to the MS4 operator. They can wait until the Speedies number, once kind of in the future, once we have those Speedies IDs ready to go much quicker, you can wait the 1 or 2 days to send both of them over at the same time. It'll still be within that 5 business day requirement. Next question is, how are linear projects handled under this permit? I don't think we've had any specific changes to linear utility projects.
I will point out that yeah, so like a linear, you still look at if it's a linear project and say it's like a very massive project that whatever utility it is, it's miles of a project. Collectively, it'll probably be one of the a common plan that disturbs more than an acre. But that's where, again, back in the presentation, we looked at this under Part 1A. This was added specifically, and along with this, the concept of phase and common plan. So, as a whole project, it's disturbing more than an acre, so it triggers the soil disturbance threshold of needing CGP coverage, and it needs coverage under a speedies permit or an individual permit. But with this addition of the terminology of phase in those examples, you could break that linear project up into different phases, so that especially if a linear project goes through maybe a mountainous area that's an A watershed, that would be ineligible because of that steep slope ineligibility. Maybe just that one phase would need an individual speedies permit, where the other phases, as they're ready to go to construction and whatnot, they could obtain separate coverage under, as we were looking at it earlier, in Part 1D, 1C, you can submit an NOI for a separate phase. And again, even if a different phase is ineligible and needs an individual speedies permit, the other ones that are eligible can be submitted as ENOIs under the CGP. Otherwise, it's a linear project, just like any other project. If there's another question about linear projects, I think that's kind of what the question is getting at. I'm assuming that, but if there's another follow-up question, we're happy to see what that question might be.
Will the DEC send an electronic copy of the LOT, a letter of termination, to the approving MS4s? So short answer is no. If the MS4 operator requests to see that letter of termination, it would be the owner operator's responsibility to provide it. That letter of termination is similar to the letter of authorization posted on the submission overview page for that ENOT submission. So you can go in and access it whenever you need to. Next question, how long does it take DEC to issue the LOT after submitting the ENOT? Similar to the letter of authorization, it's also an automated process. So as soon as you submit your electronic notice of termination, the system will generate the letter of termination for you based on the information you provided. And again, it will be posted on that submission overview page for you to go and access whenever you need to. The submitter should also receive an email with a direct link to download that letter.
And Dan, I'll add, not for this question, but the previous question about the MS4 operator getting a copy of the LOT. In the presentation, we talked about the stormwater interactive map, this link. And on this map, those 3 steps to download the database, so general permit information and then construction permittees. If you go there, you can download a spreadsheet. So MS4 operators, anyone in the public can go here and access this data. And as we've been saying today, we're still developing the new 2025 database, but once it's up and running, this will be updated with that and all historical data. So MS4 operators can also come here and download this. You can download, like we said, by year or by county. So, and you can also, within a spreadsheet, it's an Excel spreadsheet, you can filter it out for within a county, maybe just your municipality, what pertains to you. So MS4 operators can also come here to see the status of construction coverage. It will say there will be a status field that says active or terminated, or and how it was terminated, that sort of thing. So.
What if the owner operator of an existing speedies permit has retired? Can someone else submit the ENOT on their behalf? Do we need an inspector? So for the first part of that question, if the owner operator is like an organization, like an LLC or corporation or whatever, as long as there's someone kind of filling the same role or similar role, a responsible officer of that organization can sign the owner operator certification for that NOT. If it's an individual owner operator who is either passed away or is no longer available for whatever reason, could have someone who is either directly related to them or reach out to us in those kind of situations. They might be case by case scenario. And if you do, we need an inspector. If the project needed an inspector, qualified inspector, you would need qualified inspector certification for at least the final stabilization, if that's what you're doing to terminate your project. And if you had post-construction SMPs, you would need certification for the post-construction SMPs from a qualified inspector as well. And John has the permit section up for those references.
Right. So yeah, just to jump on that, to be able to submit an ENOT, you need to meet these requirements in Part 5, like Dan was just saying. It depends on which option. If you did total project completion, okay, have you done this? Check. Have you met final stabilization everywhere? Check, and so on, including, like Dan was just talking about, inspector inspections. And so kind of the short answer, high level, is to terminate, you need to meet these requirements. Go to Part 5 and read those requirements.
Who do we contact at DEC to verify NOT received? If you are receiving bills for projects that have had NOTs previously submitted in prior years, so you can contact any of us, John directly, or the Stormwater Info inbox. We are working through kind of our last paper NOT submissions still. So if we haven't gotten to them, you can resubmit them as long as they were signed previously, say prior to the issuance of GP25. So if you've previously submitted one and you didn't get confirmation, just check back in. We'll add it to the pile and get back to you as soon as we can.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, if you send those directly to me, I'm happy to help you with that. And then just everything Dan says spot on, but also add on, so just to further clarify, if you need to, even if your project had coverage previously under GP20, but you didn't sign the paper NOT was not signed before the effective date, use the ENOT and submit that, and you'll get your letter of termination back automatically.
What is the SWIP review process for a project not in a traditional MS4 community? How does the review process work for school districts or other government agencies acting as their own MS4 review authority? So I'd say see that part of the permit that kind of walks you through when you need to seek out an MS4 operator. So only a traditional land use MS4 operator needs to be contacted. So if you have school district or another non-traditional MS4 operator, they would not be reviewing SWIPs. So I just walk through that part of the permit. I think it spells out pretty clearly for each scenario what is required. If you do have a question though, you can always reach out again.
Yeah, and I've seen some questions like this. So in the CGP, in this portion of the CGP that's up on the screen relating to MS4 operators, it's closely related to the MS4 permit. The MS4 general permit applies to not just traditional land use controls, but also non-traditional and other ones. But in the CGP permit, like Dan was saying, we're only concerned with traditional land use control MS4 operators, like cities, like anything with a municipal boundary like that. And this portion here on the screen, this applies to any owner operator. So even if you're a non-traditional land use MS4 operator, you're doing some kind of activity within, and you're meeting this within the municipal boundaries of a traditional land use control MS4 operator discharging to their MS4, you need to follow these steps too. determine if they have review authority or not. So this applies to any owner operator, but the only MS4 operator kind of named in this permit and defined is the traditional land use control MS4 operators. That's the only type of MS4 operator that needs to be contacted. But that entity does need to be contacted by every owner operator who find their project meeting this criteria.
In New York City, if a project is currently in construction since 2024 and is disturbing over 20,000 square feet but less than 1 acre, does it need to get CGP coverage now? Project obtained New York City DEP stormwater permit back in 2024. The project does need CGP coverage. Can construction continue while the CGP is being applied for?
That's a good question. I think that one would be better served to, we can take it to DEC or Region 2, where New York City is, to collaborate with our regional staff and with New York City DEP, because that's not, that's like a unique scenario because of this new permit and the transition. So we can help you. If you know DC regional contacts, you can reach out to them directly. If not, contact me and I can help connect you and we can navigate that with the correct DC staff accordingly, and we can sort that out.
If you have a large site, such as an industrial park with a planned sale of parcels over a large time frame, where layouts/site plans for many of the individual lots have not yet been developed, but the idea is for each parcel to manage its own stormwater on its respective lot, would it still be considered part of a common plan of development? If so, what amount of SMP planning is required for these yet to be developed parcels?
So the simplest answer is it a common plan of development or sale? The question in response to that is, does it meet this definition? And it sounds like it does. So it sounds like you have some kind of documentation that construction is indicating that construction activities may occur on a specific plot. So so you always have to come to the definition. Does it meet this definition? From what I'm hearing, it sounds like yes, it does. So that's just the initial question of, do you need coverage? So that then you go back up to part 1A, and yes, you're part of a common plan. So you've got 1 or more acres. You need CGP coverage. So that means any phase within this common plan needs coverage. And then to determine what, like as you go, it just depends on, there are, I guess, just different scenarios of how it plays out of what you need to do in a given SWIP as you go. And that would, again, go back to part 3C, this paragraph here of you need to look at what's going on and determine what the SWIP requires based on Appendix B tables 1 and 2. Otherwise, if it's I don't know, I guess if there are other scenarios or further questions, you can reach out with that specific question in mind, and we can loop in the regional staff and look at, you know, specifics case by case. Do you have anything else to add to that there? Okay.
Okay, this is a follow-up to our first question about the amending an old project. Under what conditions would a new ENOI need to be submitted? So the old project was before green infrastructure requirements. The new project portions are designed to 2024 design manual. It's a redevelopment with decrease in impervious. Do they need a new ENOI? We might have to talk about this more. So
they don't have coverage now? Are they finished the project?
it's old project with coverage.
Okay.
Amending the SWIP for new project areas to 2024 stormwater design manual.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we could certainly talk and loop in regional staff for you know, a specific question like this for project case by case, but if it's, following the concept of phase and common plan, if it's if you're now adding and expanding a new area that wasn't there before, it's still part of a common plan, so it needs coverage, and you could submit an ENOI for that separate phase under the new CGP and obtain coverage that way. That might be the cleanest, simplest way to proceed. But yeah, again, anything that's like really project specific like this, we can loop in regional staff and help navigate what to do.
I noticed that there is no location in the NOI to list the reported values for QP and QF, overbank and extreme flood controls. Is this something that's planned to be added? So the NOI has a lot of conditionality. So what you see up front is not the entirety of the application. So if the QP and QF are required, you will see a place to fill those out. If you've answered in such a way where you don't need to provide those values for whatever reason, either you selected one of the waiver criteria or the type of project doesn't require those, you wouldn't even see them. If you think you are meeting these requirements and you do need to report them, reach out. The NOI is pretty big. We've done our best to test and make sure it works. We've made a couple updates already, but if there is an issue, we can fix it. So those are on the NOI. You'll see them if you need them. If you're not seeing them and you think you need them, just reach out to us and we'll figure it out. Will the submission to DEC be via a portal? Will the applicant have to register to access this portal? Yeah, so to use NForm, you do need an ny.gov account. The New York State DEC NForm page has kind of a walkthrough of how to set up that account. If you do have issues setting up account, we have our NForm support inbox you can email. If you don't know that email address, I believe it's just nform-support@dec.ny.gov. But you can also email us and we'll forward it to them. So this is kind of going back to that new NOI submission, asking about the old permit coverage. If you do submit a new NOI, so the question is, if a new NOI submitted, is the old permit administratively terminated and a new permit number issued?
Beck, this is on that scenario where they're adding on to something. Okay. Yeah, let me clarify what when I was saying a new, let me get to that part of the permit. So the concept of phase and common plan is a phase is a separate footprint. So if you have a project that's like 5 acres and you're adding on another acre now as a new phase, it's a different footprint. It's a separate area than the initial 5 acres. So what I was suggesting back to that other scenario was if you have existing coverage for those 5 acres, but now you're adding on another acre, it's a phase that's part of this common plan. You could submit a separate ENOI for just that phase, so that just that phase has new coverage under GP25, whereas the other one that had continued coverage is still separate. And that would have to be, so any coverage that you have previously existing has to be maintained or terminated accordingly. So it's different than, I was not suggesting a new ENOI for the entire thing. So just to clarify that, I was suggesting a new ENOI just for that additional phase by itself. And hopefully that clarifies the question, but we'll see if another question comes in.
So what are the ENOI filing requirements if the project is located within a non-traditional MS4? Is a signed MS4 acceptance form required? So going back to that part of the permit, we only need MS4 acceptance from a traditional land use control MS4. And it's if the owner operator is a non-traditional MS4, they still should go through that process of checking with the MS4 operator, traditional land use control MS4 operator, if that review is required or not, and then they can get either the MS4 swift acceptance form or the non-jurisdiction form.
Yeah, I think the question was the question if the owner operator is a non-traditional
Located within and
is located within. Yeah, again, so I know we've said it before, maybe the question came before we answered it, but so in the CGP, the only MS4 operator we're concerned with within the CGP context here is, are you within the municipal boundaries of a traditional land use control MS4 operator? And that's defined in Appendix A, and it's the same definition of that's defined in the MS4 general permit for that term. So it's the only it's the only one in the CGP, traditional land use control MS4 operator, city, town or village with land use control authority. So if you are within one of those, a municipality, the municipal boundaries of one of those, then you want to look at that portion of the permit we were just looking at. If you are near a non-traditional land use control MS4 operator, that doesn't matter in terms of the CGP and sign off from them. So within the context of CGP and MS4s and MS4 operators, we really just have two types of parties. We have owner operators, which could be anyone, including a non-traditional MS4 operator, anyone who's an owner operator, and then traditional land use control MS4 operators. Are you within their municipal boundaries? And if so, that's where you want to come back up to this part of the permit where that applies, part 1D, 2B2. If an NOI includes any construction activities within the municipal boundaries of traditional land use control MS4 operators that will discharge to their MS4s, then you need to follow these steps. If you're not within those municipal boundaries, then this doesn't apply at all, anything under 2. All you would need is what's needed for every single NOI. You need the SWIP, you need the SWIP preparer certification form, you need the owner operator certification form. You have to meet all the eligibility criteria and answer all the questions in the NOI. Hopefully that clears it up.
Technical question, how is equivalency determined when there is a deviation in the technical standard regarding 60-day review? So how do you determine equivalency to a technical standard?
So equivalence is a concept defined, the term is defined, equivalent or equivalence as defined here, that the practice or the measure, it meets all the performance, longevity, maintenance, and safety objectives of the technical standard and will provide an equal or greater degree of water quality protection. So like the short answer is, if you're trying to demonstrate equivalent or equivalence, have you met this definition to do so? And if you've met this definition, then yes, you've demonstrated equivalence. It's equivalent as defined by the permit. And like most things, if you have a specific question about, so that's like the big picture, but if you have a specific practice in mind that you're wanting to do this with, and you have questions about, are you meeting this correctly, certainly reach out and we'll have regional staff for your project work with you, and I can be looped in as needed, and we can navigate that together.
This is regarding the GEMS solar webinar. What is the approximate timeline for the webinar mentioned RE guidance on solar projects and the CGP? And will the stormwater info email list be notified of this training?
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I misspoke. I think I was just saying that the GEMS is developing a training. I don't know that they plan to put on a webinar. I can reach out to them and ask them that. Make note of that right now. And if they are, I could certainly make sure that we share that information with the CGP mailing list and let everyone know. But I did bring that up to say that it's being developed and finalized as a resource that we do plan to roll out and share. So I think it could be a good idea. I'm like I said, I'm not in GEMS, so I can't speak for them that it will happen, but it's certainly a good idea, and I can kind of share what we did today and ask them if they would consider doing that kind of doing a webinar on that in the future. But otherwise, if there's whether that happens or not, if you have questions about GEMS, we can. I don't know if they have like a. I'm not aware of like a common GEMS email account, but if you contact me and you'd like to get put in touch and connected with someone in GEMS, I can connect you directly with someone in there. But I will follow up to ask them about that question if they will put on a webinar of some sort. But they definitely are building this presentation and training and going out with it to start share that information. So it's it could become a webinar. I don't know. We'll find out.
REUPA permits. If a project does not require seeker review, is there a direct way that we can receive DEC indication of other permits needed? I think you would want to be in contact with regional DEC staff or regional DEP, Department of Environmental Permits staff, about any other permits your site might need.
Yeah, DEP, Division of Environmental Permits. Which eligibility item was it?
I was just asking if a project does not require seeker review, is there a way to find out if they need other UP permits?
Oh, okay. Yeah, so seeker, if there's no seeker, if there are UPA permits, yeah, I think like Dan just said, that's for the context is on the screen. This is part 1A7. Yeah, like Dan said, you can contact your regional staff and maybe the Division of Environmental Permits within DEC, and they can help navigate that. So just for context, Dan and I we're in Division of Water, Bureau of Water Permits, and we're implementing this construction general permit. But then there's also within DEC a Division of Environmental Permits, which can help coordinate multiple permits, not just within Division of Water, but also other divisions as well. And so oftentimes they are a great resource to reach out to and to help navigate what other permits you might need.
If a SWIP was prepared under 2020 CGP and obtained continuing coverage under 2025 CGP, does the SWIP need to be revised for additional requirements cited in 2025 CGP?
No, if so the I know it's in the fact sheet or response to the summary. I have to search for it, but the short answer is if you are following Part 1F and you've submitted an RCC, you can continue with the SWIP that you had previously. You did not need to redesign the SWIP. The bigger point here, like I said during the presentation, we were cleaning up records and checking in that the project's still eligible, it's meeting the eligibility requirements, and like we say here, verify some contact information for the owner, and also confirm a new owner operator certification form that the owner is has read and will comply with this new version of the permit. But the SWIP could just be carried forward, did not need to be redesigned to be able to submit the RCC.
For a federal facility, will a NEPA be adequate to satisfy SECRA? So that's the Federal Environmental Quality Review through NEPA. I think you would want to double check whatever your environmental quality review is for that site, making sure that you have it satisfied and whether you need to do a state equivalent review or not. And you would check with Division of Environmental Permits about that.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pull up. I can't see the screen very well. So we've the seeker questions, the UPA permit questions. These are all good questions to go towards, like we said, this other division within DEC, environmental permits. So they have their own, you can search like I just did, you'll find their webpage. If you have questions, we can help. If you contact us directly, we can help connect you with someone, but they probably have some general email accounts that you could find, or you could call regional office. Like here's DEP permitting. You can reach out to this mailbox here, and they can help with questions related to seeker, to UPA permits. Like I said, that would be more their expertise. Even like SHPA's here, seeker. So you can do a little research on your own. You can contact them directly. And if you start with this contact here, they'd probably be able to point you in the right direction if it was a regional specific question. But here's FYI, here's their information.
This is a question about proprietary practices. Question is, we noticed that a lot of the hydrodynamic devices that have been removed from the New Jersey DEP and NJCAT approved list this year. But if we have a project under GP20 permit with continued coverage under GP25, can we still use a hydrodynamic separator that was on the previous approved list last year?
So the question is related to, let me jump to the toolbox. So on this web page, toolbox, we have a section on, jump down, find proprietary practices. So they mentioned, the question mentioned, like, I think it was the New Jersey CAT, maybe the, so we didn't get into detail during the presentation, but we basically rely on some other state resources to see like if what other states have been approving. And so one of them is this New Jersey reference that was mentioned in the question. It sounds like the question says it was removed from that New Jersey list. If there's something that was approved by DEC under GP20 and you've got continued coverage, it's still good under GP25. And if we have something here on our table of verified proprietary practices for new development, if it's on our, like, go by our webpage and go by that. Otherwise, if you still have a question about something specific to that, feel free to reach out to me directly. But basically, like just like the SWIP, if you had a design that was approved under GP20, and you've got continued coverage, it's still it went through whatever testing or requirements for us of review to say yes, this is providing sufficient water quality protection, and the design was approved at the time, and we're carrying that forward under GP25. But again, there, FYI, here's some more information about proprietary practices on this portion of the web page, and hopefully that addressed the question. But
Are ENOIs required to be filed for New York City jobs which are under the 1 acre disturbed and less than 5,000 square feet of new impervious area? So I go back to that part 1A, soil disturbance eligibility in the permit. If you are in New York City, municipal boundaries of New York City, you are less than 20,000 square feet, and you're doing less than 5,000 square feet of impervious area, you would not need CGP coverage. So just refer to that part of the permit and make sure that you're meeting or under one of those thresholds. For an NOT with post-construction practices, does the qualified inspector need to sign both certification forms or just the SMP cert? I think the NOT does a little bit of a walkthrough of this. If your project required qualified inspector inspections, you would need a qualified inspector certification for the final stabilization. And if you had post-construction SMPs, you would need a certification for those as well. If your site didn't require qualified inspector inspections, you wouldn't need to provide qualified inspector certification for final stabilization. How do I find out if another department in the county completed the RCC, that is the request to continue coverage form, for an existing project with coverage under GP 20? In the future, you'd be able to look it up in our database, but if you want to find out right now, you can send us an email with the NYR number, the Speedies ID. We can look up to see if one has been submitted and let you know. Currently, New York City projects that require coverage under the CGP must file with the New York City DEP and New York State DEC what seemingly seems to be identical programs. Is there a plan to name a lead agency, either state or city, so that resources are not unnecessarily tied up and bureaucracy is lessened to the developer? Yeah, so the new threshold requirements for New York City kind of mirror that New York City DEP permit requirement. So if you need coverage under New York City DEP and New York State DEC permit coverage, you need to submit for both. I know New York City DEP has maybe a more involved process. For us, you just need to submit that NOI as soon as you have the MS4 SWIP acceptance form if needed from New York City DEP.
I think, and was the question like asking if you're combining them somehow or something? But I think in short, the simple answer is New York State. Everything we're talking about today at this is CGP state level, New York State CGP, and then separately towns or cities, traditional MS4 operators like New York City can also have their own additional requirements kind of separately. And so they are separate entities, even though I think the question was saying they kind of mirror each other. They are separate, and I don't think there would ever be any kind of like combination of the two, just because they're administered by different authorities, basically.
Yeah, it's not like a combined review where we'd have named a lead agency. The state permit is separate, so it's handled by state. The New York City DEP permit is separate, so it's handled by New York City DEP. I think this is just a comment from someone. I want to clarify that if your wastewater treatment plant will be built during phase 3, but it's serving homes in phase 1, you don't have all your UPA permits for phase 1 until you have the wastewater treatment plant permit. So I think that goes back to the question about if you're submitting for phase 1 of a project, do you need all your UPA permits for a future phase? This is saying if you have, say you're doing a subdivision, you have homes being built in phase 1, and a wastewater treatment plant is serving those homes, you need to have the permit required for that wastewater treatment plant that will be serving those homes from phase 1. So you can't wait on that one. Will an updated green infrastructure worksheet be posted? There are still portions of it that are giving errors. Is there a specific place these comments should be sent so they can be fixed?
Yeah, back to the toolbox. That's a technical question on technical tools, stormwater interactive map. Then there's this GI worksheet, which goes with kind of complementary to the 2024 design manual. Yeah, you can send questions like that to me, and I can help compile those. We do plan to update those worksheets. It wouldn't just be me alone, but I'm happy to be a point of contact to receive those, to help work on those. And yeah, case by case, I can get back to you by email if you reach out to me directly. So with this new 2024 design, just for context, kind of beyond the question, this worksheet kind of helps with designing projects using the design manual. Because the 2024 design manual just went out, this GI worksheet, this one that goes with it, is also new, and we're working out some kinks and finding some needed corrections in it because of that. So certainly at any point, please contact me with anything like that, and we'll try to get that done as soon as possible, so that it's as useful as possible for the public.
This question is about definition. Please clarify if waters of the state includes groundwater. I think we can just pull up that definition and just look at it right now.
So in the CGP, we have a definition for surface waters of the state, because as I was saying, this CGP program, this permit is a speedies permit specifically for surface water. So there's a definition for surface waters of the state, which does not include groundwater. It's separate under this. So this permit is concerned with surface waters. During the presentation, kind of in the big picture, talking about DEC in the context of speedies, the speedies program does also like have some protection over groundwater, but the CGP program that we're talking about today is specifically a surface water permit, not for groundwater. But so looking at this definition, it's surface waters of the state. If you're just talking like bigger picture philosophically or whatnot, like yes, waters of the state could include groundwater, but not within the context of this CGP program. We're not concerned about that in the sense of this program is concerned with discharges to surface waters.
Many municipalities require that sites contain their own stormwater. Assuming we can accomplish this and we do not discharge anything to the MS4 system, even during construction, then we shouldn't really need coverage under CGP, right? Seems to be a topic that causes a lot of confusion. Some clarity would be great. Municipalities are withholding approval until SWIPs are created for projects where stormwater will never leave the site and therefore never enter into surface waters. That's a big question.
Can you rephrase that question? Or
So
is it kind of a bigger one?
it's going back to kind of that bowl question where if you are containing all stormwater on site, do you need CGP coverage? And I guess the addition to that is municipalities are requiring SWIPs for projects where stormwater would not leave the site.
Okay. Let's see if I'm in the right FAQ document. Yeah, so here, this is the from this CGP webpage, the first one we looked at. So it's on this webpage is the FAQs on permit requirements document. So frequently asked questions. Number 2, is permit coverage required if there's no discharge to surface waters? Like if it all completely goes into the ground, like Dan was saying, like I had said before, it's a rare occurrence, but if you're in like a topographic bowl where there's absolutely no chance for water to go to surface waters, you can come here and look at this. You have to basically demonstrate that for all of the construction without any controls in place, without putting any kind of silt fence or anything up, that would be true. For all recorded storm events up to 100-year in frozen ground conditions. So even like the 100-year conditions in frozen ground without any controls in place is all the water staying within that bowl and going to the ground and not going to surface water. So, including like if anything you're doing or changing with your grading operations. So this is the one to come to. Look at this, and then if you are having still questions and you're working with a specific MS4 operator, you can certainly reach out to the region where you are, and if you have further questions or to clarify kind of navigating that conversation with the MS4 operator. I will point out with this FAQ at the end of it, this is still true. Whether you obtain CGP coverage or not, even like let's say you do meet this requirement and you don't need CGP coverage because you're meeting all of this, so you don't have permanent coverage. If you do have a discharge that causes or contributes to a violation of a water quality standard, it's a violation of state law. So if you understandably, if you don't feel like you need CGP coverage, you don't need to go through the process and pay the fees, but you still probably want to do the best practices like putting up erosion sediment controls and making sure that you are not causing a violation to a water quality standard, because that would be again a violation of state law. So.
Can a site manager or other on-site representative's cell phone be used for electronic access to SWIP documents?
I would say go back to that. This is going back to the requirement part 1E. That's not, if you think about it, think about an inspector coming to the site and needing something equivalent to paper. So right now I'm looking at a little laptop screen. It's kind of equivalent to paper. A cell phone might be pretty small and not necessarily equivalent to paper. So part 1E5, so it's got to be accessible to the inspector to the same extent as paper copy would be if the paper copy was there. It has to be functional equipment. So that doesn't, like a tiny little cell phone screen wouldn't really meet the intent of equivalent to paper, the same extent as a paper copy.
Okay. Follow up to the remediation question. Remedies often employ impermeable cap installation, example asphalt, low perm clay covers, etc., as engineering controls. From how you answered these, engineering controls would now potentially require permit coverage, even though New York State programs under DER are exempt from New York State permit coverage. So for clarification, if the regulated activities are part of the remedy, you don't need coverage, but if post-remedy includes a development, i.e. the remedy area will be used for parking, then it needs to be covered. Yeah, I think if you are doing anything in addition to the remediation work that would be defined as a construction activity, you would want to have CGP coverage for that activity if it is eligible for coverage.
Yeah, but the question is asking about like remediation work, and especially if like division of environmental remediation is involved, any of the work that's done under that is not CGP, like not under CGP. So in addition to what Dan just said, yeah.
This is a comment about the NOI spreadsheets for access through the Stormwater Interactive Map. It should be noted that there is quite a bit of variation between the 2003 to present county by county and year by year spreadsheets. It appears they're not being updated concurrently and causes time-consuming effort and confusion when trying to figure out the status of a speedy site. Yeah, so if you notice any problems with the spreadsheets, feel free to let us know. We did fix the 2003 to present spreadsheet recently. Someone noticed an issue with it. If you're still seeing problems, maybe email us with an example so we can look at it and let our IT people know what needs to be fixed there. I will say that these spreadsheets currently are probably not being updated because they're still looking at the old database. So they haven't been updated with anything new that would include the RCC and any NOIs for GP25 that have been submitted, or ENOTs that have been submitted for GP25. I think this question got cut off, so I'll move to the next one. If a paper NOT was signed before the effective date of the new permit, but never submitted to the DEC, what is the process for terminating?
Yeah, if it was signed before, you can send that to us. You can send that to me and we'll process it. So it's about the effective date of the permit. If it was signed before that effective date, and you just didn't get it into us yet, you can get it to me, we'll process it. Alternatively, if you, really the more efficient way, if it's easy enough to get those signatures again, you can submit an ENOT, and it doesn't take any email back and forth with me or with you, and you'll get that letter of termination automatically, and it's the streamlined approach. But like Dan said earlier, if it has been signed prior to the effective date of the current permit, you can get that to us and we'll process it.
When signing into N-Form, I often end up on an alternative New York State website clearinghouse, not the New York State DEC N-Form website. Any ideas how to consistently arrive at the correct site? So it does, N-Form requires the ny.gov login. If you are using the ny.gov login as like a direct link, it will just bring you to like, here's all the stuff you can access from your ny.gov account. What I do is I bookmark the N-Form website directly. So that's nform-prod.dec.ny.gov. If you're not already signed into N-Form, it will prompt you to sign in, and then it should redirect you directly to N-Form. So I'd recommend bookmarking the N-Form site directly and not just the ny.gov login, unless you want to see the other stuff on your ny.gov account.
Or if you don't feel comfortable making a bookmark on your webpage, you can just come to this. I linked to here from the CGP webpage. We have a link to the DEC N-Form information webpage, which is this one. N-Form login. You can click on that. It's the same link that Dan just mentioned. So either way will get you to the right spot.
How to submit an NOT for a project that submitted for permit coverage and placed construction entrances, but stopped the project after this due to money issues. No site disturbance was completed. So I think to generalize, the question is how to submit an NOT for a site where you have no soil disturbance.
So NOT questions, you come to part 5, how to terminate coverage. To submit an ENOT, you need to meet one of these requirements, either total project completion or planned shutdown with partial project completion, which would be like all soil disturbance activities have ceased and whatnot. But the question's asking if you didn't actually disturb any soil and you canceled the project, that actually is not one of the options here under ENOT. These options are all based on the assumption that the project has commenced construction activity and has disturbed soil. So if you actually have canceled the project without any soil disturbance, reach out to me directly. And what you need to do is just have the owner operator submit a rescind request, a letter requesting that coverage be rescinded, and explaining the reason that the project was canceled and we did not disturb any soil, and it will not move forward. We will not be disturbing soil. And if you send me that letter, I will be able to follow up accordingly, let you know that the project has been rescinded.
A project has two phases, one requiring erosion sediment controls only and one requiring post-construction practices. Two different consultants prepared the report for the two phases. Can two preparers sign the NOI certification form? Yes, so you could submit two SWIP preparer certifications. The upload previously didn't allow for multiple files, but now it does. So you can submit them as two separate certification documents, or you can kind of combine both certifications into one document and just upload the one document with both certifications.
So, and just to clarify, if you're combining them, have each person sign a separate form, but just combine in PDF the two signature forms. But each form should be filled out by one person in that scenario.
Can DEC provide clarification regarding nuance of pole structure replacement on overhead utility projects? Under the definition of construction activities, replacement of existing utility poles is listed as a routine maintenance activity, which would make the activity exempt. However, Table 1 lists the installation or replacement of overhead electric transmission line that does not include the construction of permanent access roads or parking area surface with impervious cover as requiring a SWIP with erosion sediment controls only. These seem to be conflicting.
What was the table one? Again?
Table 1 is installation or replacement of overhead electric transmission line.
Okay, thanks.
That one right there.
So this, yes, the question is getting at this, and then I'll jump to the definition for construction activities with routine maintenance in a second. But so basically, if you go to that routine maintenance, the description of routine maintenance in that definition, and you're meeting that, it doesn't need coverage. But here, the confusion is saying it seems like it's saying the same thing. If you see something like that, you can always reach out to us. I see the confusion being like installation or replacement of these things. It would be Table 1, just erosion sediment controls. And this one says like electric transmission line or a ski lift tower that doesn't have these things. So basically, if you're doing a ski lift tower or something here, it would be erosion sediment controls Table 1. But going to the definition for construction activities, routine maintenance. So the construction activity does not include routine maintenance, and we've added one like replacement of existing utility poles. So for this case, in this specific one, replacing an existing utility pole is routine maintenance. It does not need CGP coverage, even though it seems to conflict with that Table 1 bullet. So anytime you see something like that, reach out to us and we'll clarify. In this case, I just know offhand that this, I think, came up in, I'm pretty sure, a public comment, which we could find in the responsiveness summary. And I think that's why it was added here. And then in that process, we probably just missed that there was that confusing bullet, like kind of conflicting with it in Table 1. But since it's listed here under the example of routine maintenance, it is routine maintenance if you do that. And I'll just make note that that's something else we could clarify. So, and just conceptually, if you see anything like that, feel free to reach out and we'll help clarify how to move forward with any scenarios like that. So thank you for raising that to us.
For developing solar farms that meet the requirements for only erosion and sediment controls, can the contractor stabilize the site in phases of less than 5 acres and then come in and install the posts and panels all at once after the site stabilization has grown?
Sorry, I was making a note. So they are disturbing more than 5 acres or less than 5 acres?
They're assuming they're disturbing less than 5 acres because they're stabilizing in phases of less than 5 acres. then coming in after everything is stabilized to put in posts and panels. Is that allowable, I guess, is the question.
I guess maybe we would need a follow-up question just to, or like follow-up, yeah, just to kind of nuance the question. But I think one of the aspects of the question is, can you disturb a certain amount, stabilize, move on? And the answer is yes. So as long as you're staying on that issue of greater than 5 acres, you can disturb less than 5 acres, stabilize it. Once it's stabilized, then you can move on and do further disturbances. And you're good without having to do a request to disturb greater than 5 acres. You don't need to go through that process if you are making sure that at any one point your disturbance is less than 5 acres. Including if you're doing something and you have temporary stabilization, as long as you've met the actual requirements for that. If your disturbance is less than 5 acres, you're good to go, and you can keep doing that and staggering the amount, the area that you're disturbed, as long as you're under 5 acres. So I'm not sure exactly. We might have to. I don't know if there's more to that question if another follow-up question comes in, but I think that's kind of maybe the gist of what the question was getting at. But.
This is our last question that I see. Referencing part 1E5, if using a tablet/laptop to maintain the documents on site electronically, would that device, tablet or laptop, have to be located on site 24/7?
So with all of these questions, is first go to especially if it's a specific question, a question about a specific permit reference, go to that permit reference and read it carefully and start there, then go to the fact sheet, response to the summary. So this part 1E5 says, if electronic documents are kept on site, must maintain functional equipment on site available to an inspector during normal hours of operation. So in this specific question about a tablet, that tablet, as long as that is maintained as functional equipment and on site during normal hours of operation, you've met part 1E5. So if you take it home at the end of the business day and you go home, or it's in your truck, or wherever it is, and it's off site, but then you're there again in the morning during normal hours of operation, you've met part 1E5. Okay, is that all the questions then, Dan? Okay. We still have about 200 people still on, but we'll give it one more minute to see if any other question comes in. Otherwise, we plan to, like we said, we have this recorded, and we'll post it, and also post the presentation. And certainly feel free to reach out at any point if you have any questions in the future. And we're happy to help as much as we're able. And yeah. And again, just on the CGP mailing list, please, let anyone else know to be added to that. They can reach out to us. We're want to make sure we share all this information to whoever is interested, make it as readily available as possible.
Where are we posting the presentation?
Where will the presentation be posted? I'll plan to share an exact link with the CGP mailing list. So you should have my contact information. If you're not on that list, reach out to me and we can make sure we get you on that list. I'll plan to share exactly where it is once it's posted and live, and we'll send out an FYI for that. And I think that was maybe the final question coming through. So I think we might wrap it up there. Thank you all for coming, and yeah, take care. Thanks.